does. It's not over yet.
And David, you're back in Tahiti, I see.
I am. Nice, you know.
So, Brian, while we're kind of hanging out at the beginning here, is this considered a big agenda?
This would probably be in that category of a large agenda, yeah, or
Okay, got it.
a long agenda. I don't know
Okay.
if big, long, large, any of those.
Got it. Just trying to get a sense of kind of numbers and normals here. So as I kick off my
We've had quite a string of fairly light agendas. I
Yeah.
would say over the last year, this is probably the heaviest one we've had, the heaviest lift we've had in a while.
got it.
Has anybody heard from James? I'm surprised he's not on yet.
I'm texting him right now. He's having difficulty finding the email.
So you're ready to take over, Rudy?
Not just yet. We'll give him a moment.
I'll take the
On his way.
I'll take the opportunity to share exciting. I got my monthly issue of Spudman, which I'm always excited to get, being from potato country.
That's awesome.
Hi, everyone.
James, welcome.
I apologize for my tardiness. One of these days I'll get the email invitation correctly. I swear.
I always plug it. I copy and paste it right into my calendar, James. That way I have it.
I know, and I always star it so it goes in a certain folder, so I know where to search for it each time. But I don't think I did that this time around, so I'd had trouble finding it. Oh yeah. But I am all set to go. How's everybody doing?
All right.
Excellent. Good to see everyone. I guess I'm all set to go if you are, Brian.
Okay, Doreen, are we recording?
We are.
Okie doke. I think we're all set.
Okay, excellent. Good evening. Welcome to the April 14th regular meeting of the Scarborough Zoning Board of Appeals. The meeting will now come to order. This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, the public has the right to hear everything that is being said and to view all of the exhibits that are presented. Please notify the chairperson, which is myself, if you are unable to hear or see the proceedings. The board works from a prepared agenda and will take up tonight's items in the following order. We will approve the minutes from our March 10, 2021 meeting. We have the approval of the draft written decision for appeal number 2701. We have a shoreland setback determination by Kevin Brown we'll be reviewing this evening. And we have 5 appeals, 2702, 03, 04, 05, and 2706. With that, before we get started, let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all. Thank you. Okay, may we have the roll call, please?
All right. James Siebert,
Present.
Rudy Karen,
Present.
David Bork,
Here.
Chip Howe,
Here.
Peter Freilinger,
Freilinger, here.
I guess I got everybody.
I think you need
Mr.
Karen.
Oh, Karen Shute.
And Chip.
Chip.
You got me.
Okay, excellent. All right, I think that's everyone. So, with that being said, have all of the board members had a chance to review the minutes from our March 10th meeting? Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the minutes that were in the packet? Okay. Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes as they are presented? Mr. Bork?
Yes, indeed. A motion to approve the minutes of the March 10th meeting as written.
Excellent. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Motion to second.
Mr. Karen, thank you for the second. All those in favor, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Yes.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
and Mr. Howe.
Yes.
Excellent. I vote agree as well. The minutes are approved from our March 10th meeting. At this
Mr.
point,
Chairman,
yes.
Before we begin, I note
course.
that all 5 voting members are present, so I'll be acting as an alternate for this meeting.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you very much for reminding me, Mr. Freilinger. I still like to go through everybody individually, though, for what their vote is. Obviously, you're
No,
not able to vote tonight, but it's nice to know your opinion.
No, thank you. No, and I was voting at the last meeting because of Karen's absence, so probably
Correct.
does make sense for me to vote on that item. But no, just wanted to point that out for anyone listening at home as well.
Yes, no, thank you for reminding me, Mr. Freilinger. And I need to make a note of that for future reference. So tonight, Mr. Freilinger is an alternate and is not a full voting member, as we have the other 4 full voting members here. Thank you. So we have in front of us the approval of the draft written decision for appeal number 2701, the limited reduction of yard size by the design company. Has everyone had a chance to look over the findings of fact from that meeting? I'm seeing a lot of head nods. Any questions? I don't see any questions. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the findings from the 2701 application? Mr. Bork?
Yes, motion to approve the findings of facts for motion for appeal number 2701.
Excellent. Mr. Karen?
Motion to second.
Excellent. All those in favor? Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
And Mr. Howe?
Yes.
I'll try. I go through an order on my screen, even though I went to the alternate member before the voting member. But we all know what's going on. We all know what's the order here. Okay.
My feelings are okay.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. The draft written decisions for 2701 are approved. Now we will go into our first item this evening. We have a shoreline setback determination by Kevin Brown Architecture on behalf of Anthony Rinaldi. This is at 54 CV Landing Road, Assessor's Map R085 Lot 11. Do we have representative from Kevin Brown Architecture here this evening that we can drag into the call, and we can have a discussion on their setback determination?
Mr. Chair, while they're being elevated to participant, just give you a brief overview. As you know, with the latest amendments to the shoreline zone, the determination of setback to the greatest practical extent now falls on the Zoning Board of Appeals instead of the Planning Board. And in your packets, I included all of the criteria that you use when you're determining that setback to the shoreline zone to the greatest practical extent. So I'm sure Kevin Brown Architects will go into more detail on their proposal.
Excellent. Thank you very much for Mr. Longstaff. Okay, is a representative for this application willing to speak on the appeal?
Yes, this is Kevin Brown Architecture. Can you guys see me or hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. We don't see you though, but we hear you loud and clear.
I'm here representing Anthony Rinaldi and his family. They purchased this property over 15 years ago, and it's a tired, the house was originally built in 1870. They're looking to, replace it with a new structure that is more conforming than the existing structure in terms of the flood zone, the setbacks, and just trying to preserve it for future generations for their family to enjoy. To go into the design a little bit, you'll notice on the site plan analysis that we did, we showed the existing footprint as it exists today in relationship to the water setback. I believe it was in like 44 feet or so back from the closest point of the high water mark. With the new design, we're actually a couple feet further back to the closest point, and a good chunk of the footprint of the new house is going to be located really along that front setback line, or in line with the existing garage of the house along the roadside. So the bulk of the footprint is quite a bit further away from the water, and we're also, with the new design, pulling it out of the side yard setback, which it currently imposes on. We've met with Brian Longstaff a couple times, just kind of, there's a lot of different constraints on this lot. So we're trying our best to, we're limited to the height, but we're also pulling the house out of the ground a little bit to meet the flood zone, the existing flood zone ordinance, as well as removing the existing basement and creating a foundation that has flood vents in it. The bulk of the house, like I said, is along that roadside, closest point of the existing garage. We're bound by the height, like I mentioned just a little bit ago. So we're barely able to get a 2-story house in there. But the good portion of the house is behind the 75-foot setback, where we are allowed to go up a little bit higher. So again, we're just trying to get a determination on the relocation of the footprint for the new structure. But I think we've met all the different criteria for the application. So I'd be happy to answer any questions as you have them as they come up.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, can everyone see on the screen the plans for this project?
Yes.
Yes, they're up
Okay.
on my screen.
Just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Yeah, nope. Thank you, Brian. I'll put it to the board. Does the board have any questions at this time that they would like to ask while we have Mr. Brown on the line?
Pardon me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Karen.
Just like for clarification and record, Mr. Brown, when developing this plan, were there other considerations or locations taken into the planning?
Not really, because there's only a little triangle of the lot that has the ability to be 2 stories, and the goal for the house was a 2-story house for at least part of it. So we really were trying to nestle it in as much as we could into that corner where we are allowed a little bit more height. So that's kind of where we decided. Plus, there wasn't really much room to go left or right anyway. But we can't really go any closer to the road. So that's kind of where we were thinking about it originally, and it's kind of where we landed on it.
All right, thank you. It sounds as if there was some thought elsewhere on the site, but that just makes the most sense.
Other questions?
Well, I know we don't really have any criteria specifically for this type of determination, but I do know that, when I look at it, that we're supposed to be determining what I feel like somewhat our criteria, which is the size of the lot, the slope of the land, the potential of soil erosion. And I just want to make sure that we are addressing all those this evening. I did get a chance to review the application and the information in it, but I just wanted to maybe that we could comment on real quickly, I think for all the board, and what I would think would be maybe some sort of criteria here in regards to, I'm just looking at the second page of Brian's memo, which lists out the zoning board and this designee shall consider the size of the lot, the slope of the land, the potential for soil erosion, the location of other structures on the property and on adjacent properties, the location, there is no septic system. And then I know that this was a task that was pushed over by planning board. And one of the things is vegetation to be removed and to be relocated. I know that was a big thing with planning. So maybe if they could briefly speak to all those, I think that might be helpful. Mr. Chair. I don't know if you agree or disagree.
No, I agree. Mr. Brown, what do you have a response?
Sure. Yeah, I think with the survey, you could kind of see where the topography kind of slopes down once you get closer to the water. Where we've located the house is similar to where the house is located now. And some of, the other things that we have with this is we're not disturbing soil outside of where the existing footprint would be, is the goal. And as construction would to start, we would be following all the erosion control measures that we're, bound by with all this. But I think the goal was to the excavation would really happen over a good chunk of the once the existing house and garage are removed, you could see our new footprint kind of really covers over most of that. So that was part of it. And we did take the slope of the land is really the flattest where the house is currently versus if it was closer to the water, you start getting into more of a slope as it goes to the water. So those are some of the considerations that we took into the fact, not disturbing more of the landscape around the existing house than we needed to.
I have a question related to what is the foundation on the current building, and that's in that condition. Can you describe that a little bit further?
Yeah, the existing house has a full foundation under it. The garage, I believe, is just on the slab. There's some extra structures that you can see in the pictures here that have been added on to over the years. But the existing house, like I said, does have an existing full foundation, which we would be removing and putting basically, I think it's going to be on like piers, either piers or like a very low, with the flood zone, there's certain foundations that were allowed.
Yep.
So that's kind of what we're going to be putting back.
Okay. Other comments or questions from the board? I think one item here is that's worthy to point out is that it appears, and Mr. Brown, that you're trying to make the new structure that is coming in will be less non-conforming than the existing structure. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's something that with a lot of these older properties we like to see on the board. And it's just an effort to make a non-conforming less conforming. Does anyone have any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Longstaff, at this point, do we go into see if there are any letters written from the public on this particular?
You can do that now, or you can do it when you open the public hearing. I can tell you that we received no phone calls, no letters, no emails on this project.
Okay. And I guess with, yes,
Sorry.
Ms. Shute? No, it's okay.
Someone's raising their hand as an attendee. I don't know if that's on purpose.
That's okay. Well, I was just about to we can open the public hearing right now. So if there is someone in the Zoom chat that would like to discuss, then I would please, we can bring them in if we can.
And their hand is down and they're gone. So
Okay. I guess seeing no folks from the public who would like to speak on this, I guess, Brian, our next steps with this would be is this a straight up and down vote on the setback determination?
Yeah, I think you can go member by member and gather comments and their thoughts on whether or not this proposal meets the setback to the greatest practical extent.
And that would require a motion, a second, and a full vote. Is that correct?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I guess at this time, do I have a motion on the floor to approve the setback determination for 54 CV Landing Road? Mr. Bork?
Yes, Mr. Chair, a motion to approve the setback determination for the shoreline zoning appeal.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. Okay, we're in discussion at this point. What I'll do is I'm going to go through each member's for for their comments on the setback determination for the record and their vote. So, Mr. Bork.
Yeah, I think this certainly improves the location of the building and also brings it up to code. So it's a significant improvement over what's currently there. It actually brings it further away from the shoreland the problems. So I think in every way, this certainly meets all the criteria that we are looking for.
Okay. Ms.
And I
Karen?
vote- and I
Oh, I'm
vote-
sorry.
And I will vote yes, if that's what we're doing.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen?
I too believe that this meets the criteria as discussed, as Mr. Bork stated, and there is a reduction in distance. A reduction in the footprint based on the sketch that we can see, the existing and the new on top, as well as a greater extent or distance away from the shoreland, the edge of the water itself. I'm in favor of this and don't have any concerns.
Excellent. Ms. Shute?
Yeah, so I'm in favor of this and I will be voting yes. Anytime someone is trying to come more in conformance with the ordinances and the zoning rules that we have, that is great. They hired a professional firm and they've obviously, done a lot of thought and process into what they need to do to use the best land they can. And I think this, as we've seen, this is the trend with raising the homes and trying to get them farther away from the ocean and having them sustainable for longer. So yes.
Excellent. Mr. Howe?
Well, I think it's been covered. I mean, a lot of work went into this and certainly an improvement further away from the water. I'm voting yes on this.
Okay. And Mr. Fralinger?
Yeah, I'd reiterate what's been said, but I think, and I think it's important to note too, the lifting of the house and the base structure is now going to be conforming with the floodplain requirements, and obviously that's a key consideration for a shoreline setback, and I think it's a very thoughtful approach. So, yes, no problems.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Fralinger. And I will also agree with this because, again, when I previously stated, any non-conforming lot, any improvements to the lot that makes it less conforming is something that we try to take into account when folks are trying to update their properties. So to maintain what we have done in the past, I will go through each one of you. So for your vote. So Mr. Bork, how do you vote on this?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shute?
Yes.
Mr. Fralinger?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. So the setback determination passes, and you're all set, Mr. Brown, Mr. Rinaldi.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Now, before we get started into the remainder of the agenda, I wanted to address one item that I forgot to mention at the very beginning here, just a few opening remarks as we go into these appeals. So forgive me for not mentioning this earlier. So in each instance of the appeal that's brought before us, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with each of the criteria or provisions in the applicable appeal that is being discussed this evening. The board is going to ask questions as necessary to understand the nature of the appeal as fully as possible. When all the testimony has been heard, the chairman, myself, will close the record and the board will adopt findings of fact for each criteria of the appeal and vote to determine if the applicant has met the burden of proof necessary to meet that criterion. It's important to know that if any of the appeal or special exception criteria have not been met, then the board must deny the appeal or application. In many cases, the applicant or landowner may have a personal problem, which prompted the request for a variance. Now, please understand that this is not legally relevant to the appeal, no matter how sympathetic we, the board, may be to the appellant's situation. After the board votes on each merit of each criteria, the motion may be made to approve the appeal, and if there is a second, the discussion will follow. The board will then state conclusions of law based on the findings of fact to support a decision on the motion. In most cases, the board will request that staff prepare a draft written decision based on the stated findings and conclusions, as well as the audio, video, and supporting materials on the record for approval at our next meeting, as we demonstrated earlier. A general vote will be taken on the appeal. If the majority of the voting members present vote in the affirmative, the appeal is approved. If the majority of voting members vote in the negative, the appeal is denied. The board's decision stands as of the date when the vote was taken, regardless of the approval of a final written decision. Generally speaking, appeals from adverse decisions must be filed with Superior Court in the state of Maine, except as otherwise provided by law, within 45 days of this board's decision. Also, if anyone present at this hearing may wish to preserve your individual right to file any such appeal, you must be certain that this board records and evidences your appearance at this evening's meeting and the basis for your support or opposition. What that means is if you want to preserve your right to file an appeal with Superior Court, you must let us know in this meeting tonight. Again, we remind everyone that this is a public proceedings and you have the right to hear and see what is happening. All persons speaking will be asked to first state their name and address or affiliation, and all board members and interested parties are asked to direct their questions through the chair, which is myself. So forgive me for not mentioning this earlier, but wanted to make sure that everybody was aware. So what we'll start is with appeal number 2702, practical difficulty variance by David Ruff and Jane Wellen, 8 Beach Street, Assessor's Map U023, Lot 31. Mr. Longstaff, if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief background of this appeal, please, before we get started.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is a practical difficulty variance. The applicant owns a 4,500 square foot parcel that includes a dwelling and a small outbuilding. The dwelling and the outbuilding are non-conforming with regard to the required setbacks. The applicant has done some work on the dwelling, and at the time that I met with them, they noticed that their outbuilding was in bad shape, and they told me that they would be looking to do something with that in the future. So there's really no place on the lot where they can legally or conformingly locate this outbuilding, which is in very bad shape. They've done some investigation, and they've determined, in their presentation, which they'll talk to you about, is that removal and replacement is the best option for them, and they're trying to basically put it back in the same footprint, reconfiguring the outline of the building just a little bit to kind of square it up, make it more of a rectangle, and do away with some of the sort of side trappings on the building, and which they'll go into in detail, I'm sure.
All right, thank you. Now, is there a representative here? Mr. Ruff, are you available to speak on the appeal?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent, welcome. Well, why don't you tell us about the project and why a variance is needed tonight?
Great, thank you. And I'm also joined by my wife, Jane Wellahan, who's also here with me.
Hello.
I think it's pretty straightforward, as Brian had talked about. We started by trying to investigate the single car garage that's there, and off to the side, as Brian had talked about, the kind of jut out there is actually an old outdoor shower and 2 changing rooms that are all roofed over within the garage area, with the intention of repairing that, which would have been the simplest approach to take a look at it. In consultation with Bill Royal, who is doing a bunch of the work on our house now, really determined that the ability to pick up the structure, replace the bottom, probably 18 inches of that, pour a foundation, because it is sitting right on the sand at this point, was really not viable, because just the act of picking it up would probably cause the building to just fall apart. It's not all that well built there. We then met with Linda Braley, who is an architect who's drawn the plans that you're looking at. And through both of them, the suggestion was made to get rid of the kind of odd piece that sits off to the side, slightly reconfigure the structure, as you can see in the plans that we've got there, and essentially keep it in the same spot. So the walls that the side that is running parallel with the McCalman residence next to us would stay in the same spot. The wall that's in the back that is up to the Guzzi, next to the Guzzi residence, would stay the same. And then it would become slightly wider with the overall area of taking off those other pieces, slightly reducing the footprint on the lot. I would say the major reason we're looking to go slightly wider is that the advice that we've been given that it would make the building actually a little bit stronger, because it's, as it is currently right now, the width of the overhead door there essentially takes up the entire front of that. And so there's no real way to put any strength into that. And so by widening it a little bit, we get a little bit more strength so that we don't face the same problem as you can see in some of the pictures of both the rot and the tilt that has occurred.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Are there any questions so far from the board regarding this practical difficulty application? Okay. Seeing now what I'm going to do now, excuse me, Mr. Ruff, is we're going to go through each of the criteria of the application one at a time. And what I'll ask is just you read your response into the record, just so that we have a recording of your response for the official record. So question 1, the need for a variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions in the neighborhood.
Sorry about that. I was on the one even before that.
It's okay.
Yeah, this variance is being requested due to the poor initial construction and current state of repair in this building. The general conditions of the neighborhood have not influenced the request, as we are largely maintaining the same location on the property.
Okay. Question number 2, the granting of a variance will not produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood and will not have an unreasonably detrimental effect on either the use or fair market value of abutting properties.
We will be replacing a garage already in existence. 2 homes directly across from this location have garages in roughly the same square footage requested. The house on one side of this location also has a single garage. The house directly behind this location has a single garage. All of these garages exist in similar locations, largely out of compliance with current setback zoning requirements. Recognizing that the size and location on the lot mirror that of the street, this should not create an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood or negatively impact the fair market value of abutting properties. In reality, removing what is a crumbling building will most likely increase the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood.
All right. Thank you very much. The practical difficulty is not the result of action taken by the applicant or a prior owner.
We have owned this property since February 2020 and taken no actions that cause this request. While it could be argued that the original owners 80 years ago might have built a stronger initial building, finding fault in this way would be difficult, recognizing that the structure has lasted for 80 years. Lifting the building to repair it was not planned in the original design of this building, and as such should not be seen as a result of decisions made by the prior owners.
All right. Thank you. Number 4, no other feasible alternative is available to the applicant except a variance.
Through consultation with the building contractor, we have learned that lifting and repairing the building is not feasible. This building is already settled approximately 4 inches in the front and is leaning 3 to 4 inches out of plumb at every corner. The current structure does not allow rebuilding in place.
Excellent. Thank you. Number 5, the granting of a variance will result in bringing the applicant's property more nearly into conformance with surrounding properties.
Aesthetically, yes. Also being slightly less square footage and slightly more in compliance with the setbacks, it will be more in conformance with current zoning laws in Scarborough.
Excellent. Number 6, the granting of a variance will not have an unreasonably adverse effect on the natural environment.
Through a review of the GIS maps on the Town of Scarborough website, we have determined that the entire lot for 8 Beach Street is not in a flood hazard zone. Further, the location of the garage is not in a shoreland area.
Well, thank you. Number 7, the property is not located in whole or in part within a shoreland zone. I know you just answered this. Is defined in 38 MSRA section 435 or flood hazard zone is defined in the Town of Scarborough floodplain management ordinance.
Yes, and through review of the GIS maps on the Town of Scarborough website, we've determined that the entire lot for 8 Beach Street is not in a flood hazard zone, and further, the location of the garage is not in a shoreland area.
Thank you. And number 8, please demonstrate how the strict application of the dimensional standards of the ordinance to the property for which a variance is sought would both preclude a use of the property that is permitted in the zone in which it is located and would also result in significant economic injury. to yourselves, the applicant.
This property is currently a personal home, and we will not be changing the use of this property through this application. This property is permitted for home usage. If we are unable to get a variance to rebuild this garage, our uses of this space to store and maintain various outdoor equipment would diminish. In addition, the property value would decrease significantly for future owners who would not have outside storage for various needs. We do not intend to change the uses of the property or the garage we are looking to replace.
Okay, thank you very much. Does the board have any questions for the applicants at this time? Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Bork.
back to question number 6, the granting of variance will not have an unreasonable adverse effect on the natural environment. I think that the answer there obviously belongs to point 7. I'd just like to check to see whether Mr. Ruff could address that and let us know what his answer to question 6 might be.
Sure. So seeing as we're going to be in the same spot that it's at right now, it's not going to have any impact on the natural environment that's there. It won't, I can't argue that I am a naturalist expert on that, but I don't think it has any impact on, animal usage or personal usage or anything along those lines. And we're not looking to change the dynamics of the ground there. It's actually going to be in the same spot where it is right now.
And I think by reducing the footprint even that little bit, it's just more spots where the rain comes down. We'll be planting around it, and we'll add to, less roof zone and more green. I know in Portland that's very important.
Excellent. Thank you. I guess following up on that, are you planning to have any running water or sinks or drains in this garage?
We are not.
Okay. So are you planning to run electrical out there?
We are planning on running electrical out there.
Yep, that's fine. So usually on questions like this, we want to see if the construction is going to have an environmental impact. And so usually, like if you were going to put in a sink or something like that, where that's going to drain, we'd want to know where that would drain potentially. And seeing they're not having a sink here, that question isn't necessary for this.
If I might add, it could even be less than the current uses right now, which is there is an outdoor shower, which is just drained right into the ground at this point. There's nothing there. We haven't used the shower, but for years it's been running there, just running into the ground.
Excellent. And that is being removed, you said?
Correct.
Mhm.
Excellent. Okay. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. Thank you both very much. I think now we will go into the public hearing portion of this application. Mr. Longstaff or Doreen, is there anyone in the public who would like to speak on this matter, or have we heard received any emails or letters from any abutters or folks regarding this application?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we've received three letters or emails on this particular appeal. The first was from Elizabeth Seidel Mesler at 5 Beach Street, and she spoke in favor of the appeal. She said, "We want to affirm our support for the variance appeal requested by David Ruff and Jane Wellahan for their garage at 8 Beach Street, Pine Point. We look forward to them as our neighbors on Beach Street." The second was from Dawn and Sue Hamill at 3 Bay Street. And they addressed a letter to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your leadership and service to the citizens of the town of Scarborough. We're writing as neighbors and friends of David and Jane Wellahan Ruff in support of their appeal number 2702, practical difficulty. We are summer and full-time residents of the Pine Point neighborhood. We have reviewed the proposed changes to their garage at 8 Beach Street and believe they are well within the requirements for a practical difficulty variance. Will improve their property and will help to preserve the character of the neighborhood. We support your review and approval of this application. And a third email came in today from Catherine McCullum at 6 Beach Street. She and I had quite a long discussion on the phone. We went over the plans in some detail as she was struggling to understand everything. And in her words, she said she simply didn't speak the language for planning in architectural drawings. And so we spent some time on them. She writes that she is in support of David Ruff's and Jane Wellahan's request to rebuild the garage at 8 Beach Street. She has two areas of concern. One, the 80-plus year-old pine tree, which was originally planted close to the property line between 6 and 8 Beach Street, is located to the rear left side of the garage wall. She was worried about potential damage to the root system, which might cause the tree to die. She said, I will have it limbed up by the arborist who has worked on the pine trees for the last 5 years. She said, my other concern consists of adding to the original footprint on the front right side of the garage. This was a garden area for over 80 years. We have 2 ocean views at 6 Beach Street, and this garden area allowed for an ocean view for 80 plus years. I showed you the picture. She showed me a picture of her view on her phone. She said, while I realize the zoning board might not be concerned about this loss of view, I am as the owner of 6 Beach Street. But she, those were her 2 areas of concern, but overall she supported the application.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Longstaff. Is there anyone else in the, I'll say the virtual audience out there? Now, if you wish to participate, you can raise your hand. I know that there was a question earlier regarding the Zoom call, and we'll address that as soon as we get to that application. But is there anybody who wishes to speak now? Do you see anyone out there, Doreen? Hope you're muted.
I do not.
Okay. I guess I have one quick question for the applicant before we close the public hearing. The 80-year-old pine tree in question, is that staying?
I'm trying to remember it's not on our property.
So we wouldn't be touching it.
Okay.
It sounded like she was maybe worried about a root. Those pine trees have typically extremely shallow roots.
Mm-hmm.
We're not moving that edge of the garage at all. And so, and she also has extensive gardens, and we want to be able to leave those right where they are. So I don't perceive that it would be a problem at all.
Okay. I'll take a poll from the board. Any last questions or comments for the applicants? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing. Thank you both very much. Now the board is going to deliberate and discuss on each of the criteria on the application. So number 1, the need for a variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions in the neighborhood. We'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
This is an extremely small lot, and I'm not really sure if all the lots in this neighborhood are the same size. But I will assume that this one is significantly smaller than others. So it is a unique property if I can make that assumption. And when you look at the non-conformance on the lot, there's really not a whole lot you could do with this other than to replace the 80-year-old garage with a new one. And I think that seems to be reasonable. It's about the only action they have.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen? Are you also muted, Mr. Karen?
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair.
It's okay.
So I apologize. What I was saying is that with the site plan provided and the documentation, it's clear to see that with the building setbacks on the existing site and the existing house and primary residence, that it would be impossible to provide a garage, single car garage elsewhere on the site. So this does make sense. And as mentioned, it is a reduction of what is currently there.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Howe.
certainly an improvement. What's there is in pretty rough shape. And they're removing the shower, which is now draining into the ground. So that is certainly an improvement.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Frolinger?
Yes, I'd reiterate Mr. Bork's comments, but I also point out that for them to reconstruct any form of garage on the property would require some sort of a variance given the size of the property and the nature of the lot. So what they're proposing, it seems to be the only way to recover use of a building that is effectively in disrepair.
Thank you. Ms. Shute?
I agree with most of what the board has said, and the applicants also provided photos of the current condition of the garage, which is unique compared to the other garages in the area at this time.
Excellent. I'll note that I'll say the property is not unique in the aspect that there are many lots in this area that are non-conforming, no matter how you look at it. But it is unique in the situation where this is a building that is over at approximately 80 years old, not very well maintained through its later years, and therefore it needs to be maintained because it can no longer be effectively maintained. And this will also, that my response there will tie into another question later that we'll mention. But I guess seeing that, we'll go on to number 2. The granting of a variance will not produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood and will not have an unreasonably detrimental effect on either the use or fair market value of the abutting properties. Mr. Bork.
Well, it'll replace an eyesore. A building is in very poor condition, and I think will enhance the value of properties in general in that neighborhood.
Thank you. Mr. Karen?
There we go. Apologize for that. I agree with Mr. Bork in that this would create a desirable change over this current aging structure. Should or potentially increase the value of the site and help increase values of adjacent sites.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Freilinger, please.
I agree with both of those comments. I'd also applaud the design of the property. It's in keeping with the character of the Pine Point neighborhood. So the replacement not only is of an eyesore, but it's with a thoughtfully designed property thoughtfully designed outbuilding for that property. So no.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Howe?
I agree with fire.
All right. Ms. Shute?
Yeah, I think replacing the garage is going to have a desirable change, a good change for the fair market value of all the properties around it. And I agree with everything else the board has said.
The only point I'll add outside of that, the proposed garage is similar to other garages in the area. It would improve the character of the neighborhood and would not have an unreasonably detrimental effect on the fair market value of abutting properties. I would argue that by keeping it there, it would have a negative effect or a detrimental effect on nearby property fair market values. Excuse me, I'm having a hard time speak tonight. So with that, we'll move on to point number 3. The practical difficulty is not the result of action taken by the applicant or a prior owner. I'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
No, it's not.
Okay, Mr. Karen?
I agree that it's not.
Seems pretty straightforward here. Ms. Freilinger?
Agreed.
Mr. Howe?
Agreed.
And Ms. Shute?
I agree. This was the condition of the garage at the time that they bought it.
Excellent. Thank you. And they've only owned the property since I believe is February 2020 is what was stated in the application. So there was an apparent lack of maintenance to the structure over the years leading up to February 2020 that sort of brought it to its current state as it is right now. Okay, seeing that, let's go to question number 4. No other feasible alternative is available to the applicant except a variance. So we'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
I agree. This is really the only recourse. There's really no other reasonable alternative to this.
Mr. Karen?
Agreed, based on what was provided. The applicant stated that they consulted with a building contractor to look at other possibilities, but this is the only one that would make sense.
Excellent. Mr. excuse me, Mr. Fralinger?
Agreed. And as noted earlier, the setbacks on the property really don't allow for any alternative reconstruction that would otherwise not require a variance. So agreed.
Mr. Howe?
I think the plan is a good one, and it makes sense. They've done the consulting.
Excellent. Ms. Shoup?
Yeah, I agree that there really is no alternative. And they testified this evening that they did consult with a contractor and discuss the different, things they would be able to do with it. If they don't do something, I feel like we're going to be left with a garage that's still just falling into the ground.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll also mention too that going back to point number 2, having this garage that's just deteriorating in place would have an adverse effect on the fair market value of abutting properties. So I think with this, there's no real conforming location for this building to exist on this property. They've stated that the contractor trying to lift this property, the actual structure would collapse. And so trying to maintain the structure in place really is not a feasible option for them. So I agree with that as well. Let's go on to number 5. The granting of a variance will result in bringing the applicant's property more nearly into conformance with surrounding properties. We'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
I think the applicant has provided the evidence here. Clearly, aesthetically, this is going to be much more appealing. Not only that, but reduced square footage and slightly more setback than what's there now. I mean, just slight things, but it all adds up to bringing it more into conformance.
Thank you. Mr. Karen?
Agreed, a reduction in the square footage. And as stated, nearby properties also have small single-car garages of a similar manner.
Thank you. Mr. Fralinger?
No, nothing to add. I agreed with both the prior comments.
Thank you. Mr. Howe?
Nothing to add.
And Ms. Shoup?
I agree specifically with Mr. Bork. Anytime someone's going to try to come a little bit more in conformance, they're decreasing the square footage and they're going to try to come back with the setback a little bit more. I think that's good.
Thank you, Ms. Shoup. I'll also add that the applicant has stated that the garage will have a slightly smaller footprint with regard to the amount of building that sort of encroaches in the rear yard setback. And again, as the applicant pointed out, all of their abutting neighbors all have a similar structure of similar function and size. So we'll move on to number 6. The granting of a variance will not have an unreasonably adverse effect on the natural environment. Start with you, Mr. Bork.
The applicant has verbally explained how this will actually improve the environment because it has a slightly smaller footprint. And so I think that's worth noting. And not only that, but removing the showers that are existing there, even though they're not being used, at some point in the past they were. So that makes it even more less detrimental to the environment.
Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen?
I have nothing further to add.
Okay. Mr. Fralinger?
Yeah, I think this is the opportunity to address potentially the neighbor's comment about the pine tree as well. The reduction in the footprint size of the property for, as Ms. Shoup noted, is a shallow tree. Pine trees don't have deep roots. Will probably be helpful. There might be a thoughtful set of steps a construction team could take to ensure no disruption during the process of construction. But I think the reduction in footprint size overall is an improvement to the natural environment and should be taken into account as the voting members consider.
Thank you, Mr. Fralinger. Mr. Howe?
I agree with what's been said. Nothing to add.
Okay. Ms. Shoup?
I agree with the board. I think the smaller footprint and removing the shower are all going to be helpful.
I agree. I think a large item with regard to the natural environment, they're removing the shower here, and to the point that Mr. Freilinger made, it seemed that both applicants were very open to working with the contractor and their neighbor to install this shed as safely as possible to try to maintain the natural growth in that area, which is always nice to see. Okay, that's number 6. We're going to move to number 7. A tough question here. The property is not located in whole or in part within the shoreline area as defined by the Town of Scarborough Floodplain Management Ordinance. Mr. Bork.
I'll defer to Mr. Longstaff for comment.
Yeah, I can save you some time. I can verify that it's not in the shoreline zone or in a special flood hazard area.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Longstaff. I don't see a need to go through the remaining board members for that. It's confirmed by the town. We'll move on to number 8. Please demonstrate how the strict application of the dimensional standards of the ordinance, the property for which a variance is sought, would both preclude a use of the property that is permitted in the zone in which it is located, and would also result in significant economic injury to the applicant. We'll start with you again, Mr. Bork.
Practical difficulty is always a challenge, but I think in this particular case, it's pretty clear that there is economic damage here if the variance is not granted. In that the garage as it exists right now is actually a hazard and of little to no value, as shown by the assessor's assessment of, I believe it was $1,900 or something like that. Obviously, if this is an unusable shed or garage, if you want to call it that, with a dirt floor, and I think obviously, in this particular area, garages are permitted. So I think that's something that's reasonable, that a garage should be allowed. And not having the ability to replace this damaged property, we will result in economic injury, not just to the applicant, but to property owners.
You're referring to fair market value. Mr. Karen?
I agree that this is a difficult one to prove, but based on the wording of number 8 and using or having the use of the property that is permitted, they are proposing to use it in a similar manner that it's currently being used. Furthermore, they are reducing the size and becoming more in conformance with the setbacks. And as Mr. Bork spoke to, the economic potential injury.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Karen. Mr. Freilinger?
Agreed with both comments. I'd also point out, I think, Mr. Chairman, you noted earlier that properties in that area, generally speaking, have single car garages. So it would seem like an economic taking if we were to preclude the variance on the basis of this question. So I agree with the comments.
Thank you. Mr. Howe?
I agree with the comments that have been made, specifically Mr. Bork.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Ms. Shoup?
I agree with what the board has been saying this evening. Not being able to to replace the garage that's already there, I do believe presents some sort of economic injury to the owners at that time, and will be affecting the abutters as well. And those are the sort of things that you think about when you're factoring in what's permitted and what's not.
Definitely. Thank you, Ms. Shoup. As you and Mr. Bork pointed out, a garage or accessory building is permitted in the R4A district, and there's no real conforming location to put this garage. So the strict application would preclude such reuse of this. The inability to replace this existing garage would be a loss of storage, which would be an economic injury to the applicant because they purchased the property with a functional unit of storage that's on their property. Being unable to repair it, it falls into a state of disrepair and thus becomes unusable to the property. And if they're not allowed or able to repair it, that is an economic loss or injury to them. That ends number 8. I guess at this time, I will entertain a motion on the floor for appeal number 2702. Mr. Bork?
Yes, I make a motion to approve appeal number 2702.
Do I have a second?
A motion to second.
Excellent. We'll go and we have just gone over all the findings of fact, so I believe we can go through each member and state their vote. Is that acceptable, Mr. Longstaff?
From my notes, I'm gathering that based on the comments, everyone was, all the voting members agreed that all of those criteria were met. If that's incorrect, I think now's the time to speak up, and then you can take an up and down vote.
Thank you, Mr. Longstaff. And I did neglect to ask that of the board members, and I will grab that on the next application that we have. It did not appear that any board members were in opposition to any of the points of the application. If you were or are, please state so now. And then seeing none, I'll start with you, Mr. Bork. How do you vote on this appeal?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Aye, although again, I note I'm alternate tonight.
Yep, that is of course no, but I'd still like to go through everyone to hear what everyone's vote is. Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Excellent. Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. So appeal number 2702 passes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank
you all.
you very much.
Take care. Okay. We shall move on to appeal number 2703, limited reduction of yard size, residential appeal by Chris Lavoie, 41 Horseshoe Drive, assessors map U011, lot 1225. And as we're getting Mr. Lavoie set up, Mr. Longstaff, if you would give us a brief overview of this application.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is a limited reduction of yard size. Again, the criteria is that the building existed as of July 3rd, 1991, which this one does. It was built in 1986. The applicant just wants to add a farmer's porch on the front of the house, a 6-foot by 40-foot front farmer's porch. As you'll note in your packets, and as I'll display here in a minute when I share my screen, is that on a cul-de-sac, and so the curvature of the cul-de-sac sort of cuts through one corner of where he would normally want to put. The house is fine, but adding 6 feet to it, just the geometry of it is going to actually encroach into that, just a little bit of that 40-foot setback for a small distance on that front porch. And so, you know, this is the perfect vehicle for him to ask for relief on this. And then, of course, the board will just do its due diligence and its findings and conclusions. The applicant did fail to mention in his application the exact dimension, number of feet of relief he was looking for. And I believe that he has come prepared to address that for the board tonight, so we can make sure that that is in the decision should you decide to approve this variance.
Thank you, Mr. Longstaff. Really appreciate it. I'll understand Mr. Lavoie is here to chat, talk about the appeal with us. Mr. Lavoie, how are you?
Good. How you doing today?
Good, thank you. Why don't you tell us about your appeal tonight?
Well, like Brian had said, just trying to add a farmer's porch to the front of the house, and we're on a cul-de-sac, so it just cuts off that left corner of it. If you're looking at the image right now, and just trying to go through the process. So, not sure what else to say about it. Pretty straightforward.
Sure. Can you provide us with the exact measurement of relief that you're looking for here? For
4 feet. It's a 4 foot variance.
Okay. Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
I guess at this time, what I'll do is I'm going to go through all of the 5 criteria, and I will ask the questions, and you will answer them based on the answers that you've given us in our packets. That way we can read it into the record, so it's official. So number 1, the existing buildings or structure on the lot for which the limited reduction of yard size residential is requested was erected prior to July 3rd, 1991, or the lot is a vacant non-conforming lot of record. And you could just read in what your response was.
Yeah, I don't actually have that in front of me right now. So
in your application, you stated the home was built in 1986. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct.
I guess, do you have a copy of your responses in front of you by any chance?
I don't, unfortunately. No, okay. I don't have it in front of me.
I guess going forward, we can ask, we'll continue asking the questions, and I guess, Brian, do we restate what was provided in the application? And you're on mute, Mr. Longstaff.
Yeah, I was just looking for the application myself. I guess this is something this is something that I should make sure applicants know. They should always keep a copy of their applications for their use when they appeal. I sort of somehow take it for granted that people are going to do that, and that's on me. I should have made sure that all applicants have a copy. So those of you that are coming afterward, if you can scramble and grab a copy of your application, that would be great. I can also put it up on the screen here, but I think that the questions are pretty easy. I would encourage Mr. Lavoie to just simply answer in his own words, and we do have the written application as part of the written record, so I don't think it's a big deal. He can just answer off the cuff.
Sounds good to me. All right, we'll move on to number 2, Mr. Lavoie. The requested reduction is reasonably necessary to permit the owner or occupant of the property to use and enjoy the property in essentially the same manner as other properties that are in the same zoning district.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the big reasons for this is so that we can sit on our front porch and watch our kids play, because they play in the front yard, not in the backyard as much. And so just want to be able to watch them and keep an eye on them.
Excellent. Thank you. Number 3, due to the physical features of the lot and the location of the house on the lot, it would not be practical to construct the front porch or the enlargement to the structure in conformance with the currently applicable yard size requirements.
Yeah, correct. I mean, I think, because of the curvature of the cul-de-sac, it just cuts off that corner. It just looks silly if we didn't pull the front porch all the way to the end of the house.
All right. Thank you. Number 4, the impacts and effects of the enlargement, expansion, or new building or structure on the existing uses in the neighborhood will not be substantially different from or greater than the impacts of the effects of a building or structure which conforms to the yard size requirement.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's gonna look great. I frankly think probably other people in the neighborhood will want to do it in the future.
All right, great. And number 5, the applicant has not commenced construction of the enlargement, expansion, building, or structure for which this limited reduction in yard size is requested, so that the Board of Appeals is not considering an after-the-fact application. So you have not begun construction. Is that correct?
Correct.
Excellent. You can verify that through the town, Brian?
Yes, he actually applied, and we had to deny the application until he could get a variance to build it. So that's what he's waiting for.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Are there any questions for the applicant from the board members at this time?
Yes, Mr. Chair. For the applicant, I was just curious. I'm not really familiar with the area, and I didn't know if there were other properties in the area that had those type of porches. I know that you were limited because of the cul-de-sac. I didn't know if there was other properties that had front porches.
Yeah. There's some properties that have the front porches. I know there was a home on Nonsuch Cove Road, which is one street over, that just did the same thing. They just added a front porch on the front of their house. But I mean, in the 80s, they weren't doing as many of these front porches, and now, more of the current construction and current, designs add front porches, and I think they really add a lot of curb appeal to the house and the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions from the board? Okay. Seeing none, what we're going to do is move into the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this? Brian or Doreen, have we received any emails or letters regarding this application?
Mr. Chair, I have not received any emails or letters on this application.
Okay, thank you. I guess at this point, we will close the public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Lavoie. Now we're going to go into our internal discussion and discuss each of the following points of the application and go from there. So number 1, the existing building or structure on the lot for which the limited reduction of yard size residential is requested were erected prior to July 3rd, 1991, or the lot is a vacant, non-conforming lot of record. Start with you again, Mr. Bork.
Yes, built in 1986, so it does comply.
Okay. Mr. Karen?
Nothing further to add.
Mr. Feinger,
Ned.
Mr. Howe,
Nothing further to add.
and Ms. Shoup.
It's agreed, and the applicant submitted, looks like a building permit and other town documentation showing that.
Excellent. And I agree as well. So all those in favor of the number 1 being met, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Aye.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
and Ms. Shoup.
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. That takes it for number 1. Number 2, the requested reduction is reasonably necessary to permit the owner or occupant of the property to use and enjoy the property in essentially the same manner as other similar properties are utilized in the zoning district. Mr. Bork.
Yes, it's been noted that there are other properties in this neighborhood that do have front porches like this.
Thank you. Mr. Excuse me, Mr. Karen.
I agree. As mentioned, similar properties in similar neighborhood with similar front porches.
Excellent. Mr. Freilinger,
Agreed.
Mr. Howe,
Agreed.
Ms. Shoup.
I agree. It's totally reasonable for any homeowner to want to have a porch, and they testified this evening that there are other properties in the neighborhood who have them.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll also mention as well, the applicant mentioned that their children like to play in the front yard of the house. So it'd be nice to have a location for them to monitor the children, especially if it's on the road side of the property. So all those in favor of number 2 being met, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
and I vote aye as well. Number 3, due to the physical features of the lot and or the location of the existing structures in the lot, it would not be practical to construct the proposed expansion, enlargement, or new structure in conformance with the currently applicable yard size requirements. Mr. Bork.
Well, the cul-de-sac is really the issue here, and it's just because of that peculiarity, the curvature of the cul-de-sac, that a reduction, a request to reduce the setback by 4 feet is being made. And that is well within the scope of what we are allowed to do on a limited yard, reduction.
Thank you, Mr. Karen.
Agreed. And for symmetry at the front facade of the house, we wouldn't want to end it 4 feet from that cul-de-sac corner.
Right. Mr. Freilinger.
No, agreed. It's the strangeness of that curvature on the property line that makes this happen. And they're not looking for really a material variance. So on that basis, it seems like a reasonable variance.
Thank you, Mr. Howe.
Agree with the comments that have been made.
Ms. Shoup.
Yeah, they're really restricted by the uniqueness of that property where all the other ones around them don't have this problem.
Thank you, Ms. Shoup. I will agree as well. I think that the cul-de-sac curvature is really the issue here. And going forward, that could be something that the town could address with all cul-de-sacs or houses that are abutting cul-de-sacs with this issue. So all those in favor of number 3 being met, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
and Ms. Shoup.
Yes.
I vote aye as well. Okay, number 4. The impacts and effects of the enlargement, expansion, or new building or structure in the existing uses on the, excuse me, the impacts and effects of the expansion to this building and its existing uses in the neighborhood will not be substantially different from or greater than the impacts and effects of a building or structure which conforms to the yard size requirements. Mr. Bork.
Yes, again, as previously noted, there are other properties in this neighborhood which have front porches. They're similar to what's being proposed here.
Yep. Mr. Karen,
Agree. Nothing further to add.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes, agreed.
Mr. Howe,
Agreed.
Ms. Shoup.
Agreed. I appreciate the applicant telling us that what the neighborhood is like and that there are other properties there that have that.
Excellent. And I will agree as well that as you stated, Ms. Shoup, the applicant has stated that other properties nearby also have a front porch. Seeing that, all those in favor of number 4 being met, Mr. Bork, we'll start with you.
Oh.
Once you can find the,
Hello, yes.
there you go. Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
And I will vote aye as well. Lastly, number 5, the applicant has not commenced construction of the expansion for which the limited reduction in yard size is requested, so that the Board of Appeals is not considering an after-the-fact application. We were confirmed by the town that construction has not begun. So I will vote up and down on this. Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Yes.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
and Ms. Shute.
Yes.
Excellent. I agree as well. Construction has not been commenced. Do I have a motion on the floor for appeal number 2703? Mr. Bork,
I move to approve appeal number 2703 for a limited reduction in yard size.
excellent. Do I have a second?
A second.
Mr. Karen seconds. All those in favor, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
and Ms. Shute. And I vote aye as well. Congratulations, Mr. Lava. There you go. You can have your front porch.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great night. Okay. We'll move on to appeal number 2704. This is another limited reduction of yard size variance at 199 Black Point Road. And this is the owner is Jason Greenleaf. Mr. Longstaff, would you give us a brief overview, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So this again is a limited reduction of yard size variance. Mr. Greenleaf owns a property that abuts the Black Point Road. He wanted to build a substantial storage building to keep automobiles and other things that he owns in, other equipment that he owns. And he had actually had the forethought to contact the Public Works Director to come to the site and look at the drainage situation as it would impact Black Point Road. The Public Works Director, Mike Shaw, mentioned to him that he might want to talk to me and have me do a site visit as well to see what kind of relief he might be able to get in order to reorient the building in a different way so as not to impact the drainage. So we did a site visit and discovered that if he turned the building more perpendicularly to Black Point Road, it would not have as adverse effect, an impact on the drainage. And he could do that if he was successful in getting this limited reduction. The property does qualify, having been built in 1964. And again, it is a conforming lot, just barely conforming in the R2 district. And so he's seeking 10 feet of relief from the required 40-foot front yard and 5 feet of relief from the required 15-foot rear yard in order to locate a 36 by 52 building.
Excellent. Thank you. It looks like we have Mr. Greenleaf here joining us. Mr. Greenleaf, welcome. Would you mind discussing our application and generally describe the project and why the limited reduction of yard size is needed?
Certainly. First of all, good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Appreciate your time this evening. Name's Jason Greenleaf. I live at 2 Claypits Road in Scarborough, and my wife and I also own the adjacent lot, the one in question at 199 Black Point Road. And that is the lot in which I'm requesting the reduction of yard size, as Mr. Longstaff very well put forth. I'm proposing, as he said, construction of a 36 by 52 storage garage on that lot, which is currently occupied by a single family home that was built in 1964. In the preliminary design phase of this, as I was looking at constructing this building, I had originally oriented the building with the long side, the 52-foot long side of the building parallel with Black Point Road to meet the current R2 zoning requirements and setbacks with R2 zoning. As Mr. Longstaff said, in performing the due diligence from a design aspect, I contacted the Public Works Director, Mike Shaw, to discuss some of the issues that I saw being a formal civil engineer and understanding that drainage constraints and the impact on abutters might be a concern, and that of Black Point Road in the positioning of the driveway that I would need to access this building off from Black Point Road. So Mr. Shaw came down, and met with me on site. There is a picture that I provided in your packet, and I know that picture is a little difficult to understand the constraints, but as Mr. Longstaff scrolls on, you may see a picture. Apologize for the orientation here. But there's quite a significant reduction in grade along the proposed area of the building. As you can see here where he's pointing, there's roughly about a 6-foot drop in elevation over 75 feet, which would potentially not only have adverse drainage issues on my lot at 2 Clay Pits Road, I'm sorry, but also the abutting property owner next door at 201 Black Point Road. So in my discussion with Mr. Shaw, he agreed with my original concerns, and he suggested that I speak with the zoning administrator, Mr. Longstaff, to see if there was a possibility of changing the orientation of the building 90 degrees with the long side actually perpendicular to Black Point Road, as I've shown on the attached plot plan that Mr. Longstaff is getting to now. I believe it's page 1, Brian. So this would reduce the width and the length of the proposed driveway in off from Black Point Road by putting the short side parallel to Black Point Road. And it would certainly allow more options to mitigate the drainage concerns that we had, both myself and Mr. Shaw. I've also included in your packet a letter from Mr. Shaw, if you saw that, that outlines his recommendations as well. Following my meeting with Mr. Shaw, I contacted Mr. Longstaff. He graciously came down the next day and met me on site, and we discussed the concerns that we had. Mr. Longstaff understood the drainage concerns and agreed with Mr. Shaw that this could potentially cause some problems, not only from a drainage perspective, but also I think one of the main aspects here is that the architecture of the building, trying to make it as architecturally pleasing as possible, aesthetically pleasing, and the ability to move this and reorient the building would allow me to reduce the overall height of the building with setting it lower in elevation as compared to other houses around it, the surrounding homes and garages. And at that time, in speaking with Mr. Longstaff, he made me aware of the reduction in yard size application and felt that that might be my best course of action going forward to mitigate any of the problems with drainage and also from an architectural and aesthetic standpoint. So with that, as he mentioned, I'm proposing to leave the 15-foot setback from the adjoining property of Rick and Terry Cody at 201 Black Point Road, and reduce the front yard size from 30 feet, or I'm sorry, from 40 feet as proposed in the R2 zoning requirements down to 30 feet, and then a reduction in the rear yard from 15 down to 10 feet, which abuts my property at 2 Clay Pits Road. I think it's worth mentioning that that 30-foot line that you see there is actually from the property line. It's another 14 and a half, almost 15 feet from the property line out to Black Point Road. So the front of the building will actually still be set back if this reduction in yard is approved. The front of the building will still be set back from the edge of the roadway approximately 45 feet, leaving ample space for the driveway to come into the front of the building. Again, some of the advantages here to reorienting the building with this limited reduction in size would be to mitigate the potential grading and drainage impacts, allow the building to be set lower in elevation relative to Black Point Road, thus making it match existing architecture and be more aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood. Retain some of the large oak trees that are in the area that provide a buffer for abutters and the existing home on the property. And as far as I'm concerned, in review of the application and conversations with Mr. Longstaff, I believe the appeal meets all the requirements of the limited reduction of yard size.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Greenleaf. Are there any questions from the board? Seems pretty straightforward. Mr. Bork?
Yes. Is the proposed garage located where there are trees existing right now? In other words, would you have to remove existing trees to do this?
Yes, I would. There are a few large trees that would need to be removed from the site. But one of the advantages to reorienting the building, as I mentioned, is I could reduce the number of trees that are to be removed by orienting the building this way, as proposed here, versus if I were to orient it in a more conforming manner, I would have to remove all of the trees in the area.
To follow up to that, do you propose to add existing vegetation then?
I do, yes. I'm going to be looking to provide a buffer. The home on the property is a rental property. So to create a buffer between the home and the proposed garage, I will likely be retaining as many trees as I can, and also adding either some arborvitae or other type of buffer trees, or relocating some of the trees in the current area that would help provide a buffer there.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I had a question. I'm sorry, I lost internet connection at one point, but right at the end, Mr. Greenleaf, you made a comment about you said it's not actually 30 feet from Black Point Road, it's actually 45. Can you just clarify?
Yes, certainly. So the existing property line, as you can see, is at the lower half right now. Mr. Longstaff, if you could back up with your cursor, I believe you're driving. That is the edge of Black Point Road. And the edge of Black Point Road is about 14.5 feet from the edge of the property line. So there is some setback there already. So from the property line to the proposed front of the garage would be 30 feet plus the additional 14 feet from the property line to the edge of Black Point Road.
Okay, thank you.
So overall, that would be about 45 feet from the edge of roadway.
Excellent. Thank you. Other questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I've got two questions. One is about this actual schematic that Brian has up right now. And Mr. Greenleaf, there's what looks like might be tree cover, or there's sort of a bubble diagram around the house and the proposed garage. Could you just explain what that is meant to describe?
Yeah, essentially that area was the existing wooded area. And it's defined in that area as being not of lawn and finished grading area. That's actually, as you saw in the picture that Mr. Longstaff put up that I included in the packet, that area is currently forested with trees. And that's how it was depicted on the original drawing of the plot plan and the proposed lots.
Got it. And then I guess just if you could give us some color as to the sizing of the building. When you thought about reorienting it in this way, did you think about potentially moving to a smaller building to meet the setback requirements, or how did you kind of look at alternative proposals as you went through the design process?
Yeah, I certainly did. I actually own a boat that's about 40 feet in length, and in order to be able to the boat currently is placed in my yard outside, and one of the reasons for constructing the structure would be to house that boat in storage. And in order for the length and of the boat and additional seasonal equipment that I have to service both my own property as well as the rental property there at 199 Black Point Road, I really needed the size of the building to be able to fit that equipment.
Got it. No, that's helpful in understanding that. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Other questions, comments from the board?
I have one more.
Yes.
The scale of that garage, that's a very large outbuilding. It's 1,872 square feet. In fact, it's double the size of the house in that lot. Are garages of this size common in that neighborhood?
There are actually, there's just 3 lots down. You have to forgive me, I can't remember the name. It's just changed hands. There is a large agricultural structure down there. I don't know the exact footprint of the garage, but it's similar in size. It formerly held horses and other animals. There are several garages in the area that are of similar size.
Excellent. Thank you. Other questions or comments from the board? Okay. We're going to move into the public hearing portion of this appeal. So if anyone in the audience would like to raise their hand, we can bring you in to discuss any comments that you would have on this particular application. While we're doing that, Mr. Longstaff, Doreen, if there were any emails or letters that we had received with regard to this application. You are on mute, Mr. Longstaff. Sorry.
You caught me mid-stride trying to share my screen here, so I apologize. There were no letters or emails on this particular appeal.
Okay, thank you. And seeing no members of the public that wish to discuss, or anybody in attendance who wishes to discuss on this, we will close the public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Greenleaf. We're going to enter our discussion on the points of the application, and we'll go from there. Let's see. Number one, and we'll start with you, Mr. Bork. The existing structures, or the existing buildings or structures on the lot for which the limited reduction of yard size is requested was erected prior to July 3rd, 1991, or the lot is a vacant, non-conforming lot of record.
Yes, it was built in 1964.
Okay, and that is confirmed by the deed that is in the warranty deed that was provided with us as well. Mr. Karen, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Mr. Fralinger?
Nothing to add.
Mr. Howe?
Nothing to add.
Ms. Shoup?
The applicant has shown that the house was built in 1964.
They've attached the warranty deed. Excellent. All those in favor of number one being met, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Fralinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. Number two, the requested reduction is reasonably necessary to permit the owner or occupant of the property to use and enjoy the property in essentially the same manner as other similar properties are utilized in the zoning district. We'll start with you, Mr. Bork. Excuse me.
Thank you. The applicant has demonstrated that there are other garages of similar size in this neighborhood. So yes, it would meet this criterion.
Mr. Karen?
As Mr. Borg stated, the applicant has indicated that there are other properties of a similar size and use in the neighborhood. Nothing further to add.
Thank you. Mr. Fralinger?
Agreed. That stretch of Black Point Road has a number of properties with farmhouses or farmhouse outbuildings. And the applicant has designed it in keeping with that character. So I agree that it meets the standard of the question.
Thank you, Mr. Fralinger. Mr. Howe?
Yeah, that area has barns, and this looks kind of like a barn, and it looks like it's conducive to what's along that area of Black Point Road.
Excellent. Ms. Shoup?
Yeah, I think it's completely reasonable. You know, we live on the coast here and lots of people have equipment and things that they want to store. And I think I am familiar with that area a little bit, and I do know there are a couple bigger barns right on Black Point Road there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I will concur as well. There also isn't a doesn't appear to be a garage on the current premise right now to store lawn equipment or equipment to maintain the rental property that is there now. The applicant has indicated that this will also be used to support that. All those in favor of number two being met, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Fralinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Number three, due to the physical features of the lot and or the location of the existing structures in the lot, it would not be practical to construct the proposed expansion, enlargement, or new structure in conformance with the currently applicable yard size requirements. Mr. Bork?
Well, the key issue here was drainage. And I think the applicant has demonstrated that he's gone out of the way to seek the advice of staff in order to deal with that issue. And the request for the variance is within the scope of what we can approve as far as a reduction in the setbacks. So I think it's, and the other concern I had was regarding loss of vegetation. The applicant has also demonstrated that he will be planting additional vegetation on other portions of this land. So I think that the applicant has gone out of his way to do everything he possibly could to conform to the requirements here. So yes, I will agree with this.
Mr. Karen?
Agreed, as was stated, although there may be a rotation based on site constraints, this is the preferred and better approach for construction and site drainage. And based on the intended use and the length of the boat, the size of the building is not in question, but as Mr. Bork stated, the reduction of the setbacks is what we can work with, and I believe the applicant has provided enough information.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. Mr. Freilinger?
Yeah, my concern on this one was just whether alternatives had been considered in terms of building design, but it's clear that the design is being considered with the idea of what is needed to be stored. And in this section of town, clearly lots of people use buildings for that kind of storage need. And I think the applicant has gone out of his way to work with staff and with the town to make site alterations and make differential decisions to work really in the spirit of the zoning guidelines for the R2 district. So I'm comfortable with this one.
Thank you, Mr. Freilinger. Mr. Howe?
I agree with what the board members have already stated.
Excellent. Thank you. Ms. Shoup?
I mean, I think the applicant did a really good job at addressing the physical features of the lot and the constrictions and the issues that he was faced with. I mean, he went beyond his due diligence of addressing and talking to the correct people. I mean, I would love it if future applicants were watching this and did this thorough sort of presentation for us that made it so easily for these type of applications. I think this is fine.
Thank you, Ms. Shoup. I will add to this that the applicant is designing its use and intent. It's designing the garage for its intended use. He's not asking for more than what he needs. And I sincerely appreciate the fact that he had reached out to the Director of Public Works, Mr. Shaw, asked for help from Brian, the code enforcement officer, and had an opportunity to construct this building in a manner that would be a much easier path for him to achieve what he wanted, but be more detrimental to the environment. The fact that he is making this effort to do this is commendable and really appreciated by the town. So with that being said, all those in favor of number 3 being met, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. Number 4, the impacts and effects of the environment, expansion, or new building or structure on the existing uses in the neighborhood will not be substantially different from or greater than the impacts and effects of a building or structure which conforms to the yard size requirement. Mr. Bork, excuse me.
Thank you. I think the applicant has gone out of his way to minimize the impacts on the environment and to do this in a way that will have minimal adverse effect on the property and surrounding properties.
Excellent. Mr. Karen?
Agreed. Based on what was provided and the information stated this evening, the use of the building is not in question. And the impact on the site, I don't think would be out of place or character within existing structures adjacent to or nearby in the community, just due to the slopes and drainage and as indicated with the picture we reviewed earlier, the location of this building on the site is just slightly off or within the setbacks as needed to have a functional usage.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. Mr. Freilinger?
Yeah, nothing to add. I agree with Ms. Shoup. I think if applicants can work with the town with this degree of rigor, we'll all have an easier job.
Mr. Howe?
With that said, I have nothing to add.
Ms. Shoup?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to have any greater impact. I mean, I think as we said, I'm familiar with the area, and Mr. Greenleaf said there are other barn type structures in the area.
Excellent. Thank you. With regard to this one, all of you have pointed out correctly, as well as the applicant, that there are similar structures in this area just due to the nature of the neighborhood and its proximity to other areas around it, farming and the ocean. And I don't take any umbrage with this point of the appeal. All those in favor, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I vote aye as well.
Mr.
Lastly-
Chair, Mr.
yes.
Chair, before you go on, I just wanted to make one more point on that.
Please.
It's also should be noted that the front setback to the Black Point Road is actually almost 5 feet greater than the setback to the existing dwelling. So it's actually set back further than the existing dwelling, which also sort of lends itself to not sticking out like a sore thumb.
Thank you, Mr. Longstaff, for adding that fact for us. We really appreciate that. Going on to number 5. The applicant has not commenced construction of the enlargement, expansion, building, or structure for which the limited reduction in yard size is requested, so that the Board of Appeals is not considering an after-the-fact application. Mr. Longstaff, can you confirm that the town knows that this is not construction has not commenced?
I can confirm that construction has not commenced.
Excellent. And then we'll take an up and down vote on this agreement. Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
and I vote aye as well. Do I have a motion on the floor for appeal number 2704?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Motion to approve appeal number 2704 for a limited reduction in yard size.
Do I have a second?
Motion to second.
Excellent. All those in favor, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe, excuse me,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
and I vote aye as well. 2704 passes. Thank you for your time, Mr. Greenleaf. All right, let's move on to appeal number 2705, special exception permit application. And this is appeal by LK Planning on behalf of P2M Development. And this location is 238 Gorham Road, Assessor's Map R038, lot number 27. And Mr. Longstaff, if you wouldn't mind giving us an overview, if you would, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just give me 1 second, please.
Of course. Folks, get now all our notes in order.
Got to keep things neat and tidy. Yes, this is a special exception application for a property in the B2 district. In the B2 district, outdoor storage is a special exception use. It must be reviewed under the criteria for special exceptions. This was formerly the Nara Sushi restaurant, which is no longer there, hasn't been there for some time. The owner wishes to purpose the building for as a support for his dry cleaning businesses, and which require a lot of maintenance equipment and other things, which they'll describe, I'm sure, in their presentation. So again, this is not for the use as a, for the dry cleaning business. It's for the outdoor storage, which is necessary for the storage of some of their equipment. The indoor part of the building will also be used for the business, supporting the business, but some of that stuff just won't fit inside the building. So outdoor storage is what you're looking at.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Longstaff. And and to clarify for me, please, we are looking at only the outdoor storage of equipment. That is the ask here. And this will be going back to the planning board for final approval.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, Ms. Kane, if you are here to represent the applicants, please give us an overview of the special exception permit application and tell us why you're here.
Thank you. This is an existing building. It's been around for quite a while. It was a restaurant, and back in 2018, a site plan was approved to build a Napa building on that. That never did happen, and so now what the applicant wants to do is repurpose the building for the maintenance facilities, as Mr. Longstaff said. For Pratt Abbott. This wouldn't be a site where the public would come to, but the dry cleaning industry requires a tremendous amount of with different types of equipment. And so the outdoor storage is for the vehicles that they use. Typically there's 4 vehicles and an equipment loader. And those would be stored, they'd be stored out in back. It's all on existing pavement. They are proposing to add a chain link fence because there's been no occupancy in the building for a while. There has been a little bit of a problem with people getting into the back of the building and leaving things. So this is just to keep the building more secure. And you'll see the heavy black line. I mean, this goes outside of the outdoor storage, but there's been a series of additions added to the building. And so those additions are coming off. Yes, thank you. That's exactly right. And it's going to bring it back to its original size of what the building was originally. There's an old koi pond on the site. That's going to come out and they'll just fill it in with gravel to grade. There's some, they're going to add new light fixtures out in front. They have the globe fixtures now, which don't meet the dark sky requirements. And they're going to put fixtures on there for that. There's some old planter beds that are going to be cleaned up. They've fallen apart over the years. The fence, the sign, the sign for the old business is going to come down. They're just going to put the address of the site up on the sign, not the name of the business, because people would typically see that name and think that the building would be open to the public. And so they don't want to confuse, they don't want to create any confusion on that. So in terms of that goes beyond the outdoor storage, but it gives you a little background on the overall project and what the planning board will be looking at. As far as the outdoor storage is concerned, it will be all outside. The workers, there's four people in the maintenance team. They come in the morning, they pick up their truck, they find out where they're headed for that day, and off they go. Sometimes they might not come back until the end of the day. Sometimes they might be there. For the most part, what they do is go to a site and do maintenance there. But in the event that a repair is too big, then they bring the equipment to this site and keep that and make all the necessary repairs. There is an apartment in this building. There's a second floor and there is an apartment in there. That's not going to be used as an apartment, but it is going to be, they're just going to use it as office space just for the maintenance facility. So that's a quick overview of the project. There's going to be some overhead doors that get put on the building, 2 in the back, 1 on the side. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Excellent. You had stated that, excuse me, there were going to be 4 people on the maintenance team. Is that going to be the typical number of staff at this facility at any given time, generally 4 or 5?
Yeah, but during the day, it would probably be rare that all 4 of them would be at the building.
Gotcha.
It might be 1, might be 2, depending on the nature of it. Might be no one. You know, they come in, get their truck, get their orders, get their tools, the parts, everything that they need, and off they go. So it's not, certainly not the traffic that would be generated by a restaurant. And I had done some calculations in the findings that were submitted with the application. And I don't have the report yet, but Sebago Technics is doing a memo on the traffic. That will be submitted with the planning board application. but there is more detailed information coming in on that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kane. Other comments or questions from the board?
One question I have.
Yes, Mr. Frelinger.
In terms of sort of the trucks and things like that, are these large diesel trucks? Are things the types of things that would be running for long periods of time? I'm thinking from an emissions perspective. I'm thinking from an oil and gas issue sort of thing.
There are different size vehicles, from going from a van, what would be the size of about a 12-passenger van, and some being a little bit larger that would have a box type truck on them, but they wouldn't be idling for long periods of time.
Okay, so these aren't 18-wheel or semi.
No, they're I don't know that. I know they do trucks in tons, and I'm not sure exactly what they are, but no, they are all a simple box type truck, certainly smaller than a typical UPS truck.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Other comments or questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do at this point is ask you the questions A through I from the packet so we can read them into the record, Ms. King. So standards for the special exceptions. The proposed use will not create unsanitary or unhealthful conditions by reason of sewage disposal, emissions to the air or water, or other aspects of its design or operation.
The proposed use requiring special exception approval is outdoor storage of maintenance and delivery vehicles needed for Pratt Abbott. A 6-foot chain link fence with security slats will be installed around the perimeter of the existing paved parking area on the side and rear of the property. Approximately 5 service vehicles, a box truck for moving equipment, and a front end loader will be stored on site. All of these vehicles will be stored behind the building and will not be visible from the road. The outdoor storage will not impact sewage disposal. No unusual admissions to the air or water will occur.
Excellent, thank you. Letter B, the proposed use will not create unsafe vehicular or pedestrian traffic conditions when added to the existing and foreseeable traffic in its vicinity.
The special exception use, outdoor storage, will have a lower volume of vehicular traffic than the previous restaurant use, with approximately 5 to 7 vehicles and equipment stored at the property. The building will have typical business services, uses of equipment maintenance, storage, and office space. Business services is permitted use subject to site plan review in the B2 district. A 4-person maintenance team will be based at this site. During any given workday, 1 person will be on site approximately 25% of the time. And by the time, I mean the day. Most of the time, the maintenance team members are maintaining equipment in place. If the repair work is more than can be handled on site, it will be taken to 238 Gorham Road. I went through and did some calculations based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers. I can go through that, but I don't know if you want to just change that to say that a traffic report is being prepared by a traffic engineer at Sebago Technics.
I think that's perfectly acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just replace that last paragraph with that.
Letter C, the proposed use will not create public safety problems, which would be substantially different from those created by existing uses in the neighborhood or require a substantially greater degree of municipal fire or police protection than existing uses in the neighborhood.
The outdoor storage will be minimal and will not substantially increase the need for municipal public safety services. The proposed fence installation will make the building more secure. The proposed business services uses will be a less intense use than the previous restaurant use and will be compatible with the nearby uses of grocery stores, storage, and other office uses. Because the public will not be coming to the site, the proposed uses are expected to reduce the need for municipal fire and police protection.
Thank you very much. Letter D, the proposed use will not result in sedimentation or erosion or have an adverse effect on water supplies.
The outdoor storage will be located on existing pavement. No new impervious surface is proposed with this project. Therefore, no erosion or sedimentation is expected as a result of this project. The building is connected to the public water system as well as the public sewer system. The office and maintenance use will use less water than the previous restaurant use. No adverse effect on water supplies is expected.
Thank you very much. Letter E, the proposed use will be compatible with existing uses in the neighborhood with respect to physical size, visual impact, intensity of use, proximity to other structures, and density of development.
The business services and outdoor storage uses are consistent and compatible with other uses in the neighborhood. Demolition of existing additions to the buildings are proposed. No new construction is proposed except for repairs as a result of the demolition, and there will also be some interior work. A 6-foot high chain link fence with security slats will be installed to secure the back of the building.
Excellent, thank you. If letter F, if located in a shoreland zone as depicted by the town of Scarborough officials, or excuse me, as depicted on the town of Scarborough official shoreland zoning map, the proposed use will comply with all the requirements of the town of Scarborough shoreland zoning ordinance. Is this located in a shoreland zone?
No, it is not.
Excellent, thank you. Letter G, the applicant has sufficient right, title, or interest in the site of the proposed use to be able to carry out the proposed use.
Yes, P2M Development LLC is the owner of the property, and the deed that is recorded in Cumberland County Registry of Deeds, book 35-465, page 194, was submitted along with the application.
Thank you. And that is noted that this is included with the application. Letter H, the applicant has the technical and financial ability to meet the standards of this section and to comply with any conditions imposed by the Board of Appeals pursuant to subsection 5 of this section.
The owner of the property, P2M Development LLC, has successfully completed several building rehabilitations and construction properties in the area. Pratt Abbott is a well-known established company with several locations in the greater Portland area. All of the renovations for this project will be financed by the owner. The application preparation and project manager is LK Planning LLC with over 30 years of experience in municipal planning. The site plan has been prepared by Sebago Technics, a design engineering firm with over 30 years of experience in engineering and design.
Excellent, thank you. And lastly, letter I, the proposed use will be compatible with existing uses in the neighborhood with respect to the generation of noise and hours of operation.
The building will be in operation Monday through Friday from typically 6:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. All equipment maintenance will be done indoors. No weekend hours of operation or outdoor work is proposed. Of course, if there's some sort of emergency, that could change. Therefore, the proposed use will be compatible with other existing uses in the neighborhood.
Excellent, thank you. With that, we will open the, are there any questions, excuse me, are there any questions from the board members at this time for the applicant? Okay, yes, please.
This might be, she might have heard of answered it, but under E, it says the proposed use will be compatible with existing uses in the neighborhood. I'm not familiar with the neighborhood. Just for record purposes, are there other businesses around you in the neighborhood that have 4 to 6 vehicles in their driveways?
Directly to the west of this is Shaw's, which of course has a lot of trucks. Behind the building is a self-storage facility. So that's got trucks going in and out of it. And the next one down from that is Fillers, which is a reprographics company. And they have their own trucks as well as vehicles coming in and out of it. Across the street, there's one building that's vacant. On the corner is, I think it's a Cumberland Farms. Yeah, right there. I think that's a Cumberland Farms. And then there's another office. That site is empty right now. And then the next one down is some sort of office.
Excellent. Other questions or comments from the board members? I think I'll note as well that the lot in question that you mentioned as an office, I think, is also an auto body repair shop as well. Half of it's an office and the other half's an auto body repair shop. Other questions or comments from the board? Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Kane, for putting together well put together application. We're going to open the public hearing and see if anybody from the public would wish to discuss this. Brian or Doreen, have we received any letters or emails with regard to this?
I did not receive any letters or emails or phone calls on this.
All right. Thank you very much. Seems pretty straightforward. We will close the public hearing at this time, and now we will deliberate amongst the board members on each of the standards of the special exception. So letter A, the proposed use will not create unsanitary or unhealthful conditions by reason of sewage disposal, emissions to the air or water, or other aspects of its design or operation. We'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
Actually, compared to the prior use, it's reduced impact on the environment.
Thank you. Mr. Karen?
Agreed. I see a reduction. There was shared that although there will be several vehicles based on the existing parking for 33, there is still a reduction.
Thank you. Mr. Fralinger?
Appreciate the applicant's description of the types of trucks, that there won't be idling and air pollution and that sort of thing. So no, I'm satisfied that this one's met.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Howe?
I agree that this one is met.
Thank you, Ms. Shoup, excuse me.
I agree with the board. You know, the proposed use is going to be a reduction in the amount of traffic that the property was seeing before.
And I would agree. And I think Mr. Bork and Mr. Karen and everyone, I mentioned it, you know, previously was a restaurant with a lot of traffic and a lot of vehicles coming in and out. So we're seeing significantly fewer vehicles in this area. It won't be dealing with high levels of food waste. All those in favor of letter A being met, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Fralinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I'll vote aye as well. Letter B, the proposed use will not create unsafe vehicular or pedestrian traffic conditions when added to existing and foreseeable traffic in its vicinity. Excuse me. Mr. Bork?
As Mr. Hebert pointed out, it's actually will be reduced use. And I'm particularly impressed with the design of the building, where the sign will only have a street number on it, and there will be no identification on the building whatsoever that this is a Pratt Avenue facility. So there won't be any vehicles pulling into this lot unless it's accidentally. And then compare that to the prior use as a restaurant, and it's not a problem. I also point out that the gated area where the vehicles will be stored, it's all behind the building. So the public won't see anything at all.
Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen?
Agreed. And it was identified that Sebago Technics did a traffic study of the proposed vehicular traffic.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. Mr. Fralinger?
Agree with Mr. Bork, Mr. Karen, nothing to add.
Okay, Mr. Howe?
Agree with the board members.
Thank you, Ms. Shoup.
Agreed. I mean, and the proposed use for an outside storage of 4 to 7 vehicles is not unsafe.
And I would agree with that as well. Compared to the high traffic density of the Shaws next door, the other abutting properties that have commercial use. And the applicant has stated it clearly that they are deterring public entry, not physically, of course, but not advertising on the front that they're Pret Abbott, so folks won't be bringing their shirts there by accident. All those in favor, letter B being met. Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup, and I vote aye as well. Letter C, the proposed use will not create public safety problems, which would be substantially different from those created by existing uses in the neighborhood or require a substantially greater degree of municipal fire or police protection than existing uses in the neighborhood. Mr. Bork.
Actually, the impact is quite less than other nearby businesses and the prior business that was there.
Thank you. Mr. Karen.
Agreed. A reduction in comparison to existing uses and nearby businesses, as well as the proposed fencing at the rear of the building.
Thank you, Mr. Freilinger.
Agreed. And I'd also point out that it puts to use a building that's been vacant for a while and has been potentially attracting some municipal safety issues. So yeah, I think this is a very favorable item.
Excellent. Mr. Howe.
I agree with the board members.
Excellent. Ms. Shoup.
I think the outside storage use will not create any sort of public safety issue. And again, it's going to decrease any sort of issues I think any prior business had.
Absolutely, I'll agree. You're having significantly less people there. You're not having any members of the public there, so the need for municipal fire or police protection is minimal. They're adding a fence to make it more secure around the area to prevent any folks from trespassing on the property. And also, due to the nature of, repairing mechanical pieces of equipment, you're not dealing with a fire suppression system that's required for kitchens, for grease fires, or any kind of accidents that could potentially happen in a commercial kitchen. Seeing that, all those in favor of letter C being met, we'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
Yes.
Mr. Karen.
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger.
Yes.
Mr. Howe.
Yes.
And Ms. Shoup.
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. Letter D, the proposed use will not result in sedimentation or erosion or have an adverse effect on water supplies. Mr. Vork.
As the applicant has pointed out, there's no change in the impervious surface. And on top of that, there's less water usage than the prior owner of this restaurant. They use a lot of water, and in this facility will use much less.
Mr. Karen.
Nothing further to add.
Okay. Mr. Freilinger.
Agreed.
Mr. Howe.
Agreed.
Ms. Shoup.
I agree with the board.
I agree as well. And the big one there, significantly less water consumption. You're not providing this for a restaurant. You're just providing it for the employees there and the basic functions of repairing equipment. So all those in favor of letter D being met, Mr. Bork.
Yes.
Mr. Karen.
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger.
Yes.
Mr. Howe.
Yes.
Ms. Shoup.
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. Letter E, the proposed use will be compatible with existing uses in the neighborhood with respect to physical size, visual impact, intensity of use, proximity to other structures, and density of development. We'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
Not only is it compatible, it has less impact, less intensity of use, visually, as well as what's actually happening behind the fence. This is much less than other uses in the neighborhood around it.
Thank you. Mr. Karen.
Agreed. A reduction in visual impact, intensity of use as compared to adjacent structures and businesses. No concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Freilinger.
Agreed. This neighborhood is kind of designed for businesses like this, so no issues.
Mr. Howe.
It's conducive with everything within the area.
Excellent. Ms. Shoup.
I mean, this is compatible with the businesses in the area. If anything, that's less compatible as it's going to have less traffic and less, visits and things like that than the others.
Excellent. Thank you. And they had mentioned repairing some of the plantings there, but no name of the business to be on front as to avoid accidentally attracting members of the public to come in, thinking that it was more of a retail rather than back of house commercial. So with that, all those in favor of letter E being met, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
and I vote aye as well. Letter F, if located in the shoreline zone as depicted on the Town of Scarborough official shoreline zoning map, I don't know why I have a hard time saying that, the proposed use will comply with all the requirements of the Town of Scarborough shoreline zoning ordinance. Mr. Longstaff, is this located in a shoreline zone?
Yeah, let me nip this one. It's not in the shoreline zone.
Excellent. All those in favor, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Yes.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
and I agree as well. Letter G, the applicant has sufficient right, title, or interest in the site of the proposed use to be able to carry out the proposed use. Start with you, Mr. Bork.
P2M has a long history of successfully operating in the greater Portland area and certainly has the financial resources to be able to do this the right way, as proven by the fact they brought on top-notch engineering firms and development firm, engineering firm to put this together.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Karen.
Agreed. Nothing further to add.
Okay. Mr. Freilinger,
Agreed.
Mr. Howe,
Agreed.
Ms. Shoup.
Agree with the board.
Excellent. And is noted that the warranty deed for this piece of property is included with the application. All those in favor of letter G being met, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
and Ms. Shoup. And I vote aye as well. Letter H, the applicant has the technical and financial ability to meet the standards of this section and to comply with any conditions imposed by the Board of Appeals pursuant to subsection 5 of this section. Mr. Bork.
First of all, I misspoke on my last answer. So my last answer applies to this question. So I'll let that stand.
Excellent. Mr. Karen,
I agree with Mr. Bork.
Mr. Freilinger,
I agree. And I was wondering what was going on that last one. So thank you for the clarification, Mr. Bork.
A senior moment, believe me.
Mr. Howe.
I agree with Mr. Bork and have those moments too.
Excellent. Ms. Shoup.
Yes, I agree that the proposed use will be compatible with the existing uses in the neighborhood.
Yes. And with this letter H, they do have the technical and financial ability to meet these standards of this section. They've also noted that they would be able to abide by anything that we would impose upon them. And they've proven that they have the financial capabilities to do so. So all those in favor of letter H being met, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
and I vote aye as well. Lastly, letter I, the proposed use will be compatible with existing uses in the neighborhood with respect to the generation of noise and hours of operation. Mr. Bork.
Key thing is the hours of operation, Monday through Friday from 6:30 till 5 p.m. That's very reasonable hours.
Mr. Karen,
Agreed. It's stated that there's no weekend hours or hours outdoor work proposed.
Mr. Freilinger,
Agreed. And given that it's located next to the Shaws, which is, has expanded hours, and the Cumberland Farms on the corner, which is 24 hours, I think this is fine.
Mr. Howe,
Agree with the comments been made.
and Ms. Shoup.
I agree with the board.
Excellent. I mean, they stated that their hours are Monday through Friday, 6:30 a.m. to 5 p.m., which are normal business hours for any commercial business operating in that area. There are some residential houses nearby, but there are further down the street and aren't closer in proximity to this building than they are to other commercial buildings adjacent to them. All those in favor of letter I being met, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shoup,
Yes.
and I vote aye as well. Do I have a motion on the floor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, motion to approve appeal number 2705 for a special exception.
Do I have a second?
Motion to second.
Excellent. All those in favor, Mr. Bork,
Yes.
Mr. Karen,
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger,
Yes.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Ms. Shute,
Yes.
and I vote aye as well. Appeal number 2705 passes. Thank you for your time, Ms. Kane.
Thank you.
Next stop, planning board.
Yeah, yes, yes.
All right. Next, our last appeal of the evening, I believe, appeal number 2706, practical difficulty variance.
Well,
Pardon me.
James.
You went back on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So next on our lastly on our agenda, appeal number 2706, practical.
Maybe again.
That was worse than mute.
I think we lost him.
Yeah.
Mr. Karen, maybe as vice chair, this would be an opportune time to just take about a 4-minute break if we could. And that'll give Mr. Hebert a chance to get back on.
I think that's a great idea, Brian. Is there a vote required for the break?
Does anyone object?
No.
No.
Okay, about 4 or 5 minutes. We'll be right back. Doreen, did you look at your phone?
I didn't remove him that I know of. Should I invite him back?
I would, if possible.
Hello, Doreen.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. I don't understand what happened there.
I don't either. You're
got a
back on
mess-
now.
Oh, good. Yeah.
You're back.
So
But
we're
you've
all back in
changed
the
your
meeting.
name to Rudy Karen now.
For the record, I am not Rudy Karen.
With the real Rudy Karen, please stand up.
Yes, certainly not me. I don't know what happened there. I received a message stating that I was removed from the host, and I didn't think I offended anybody. So I apologize for that, everyone. I dialed it on my phone. I think it's an issue with my computer, not necessarily with the invite address. So we're on a 5-minute break.
No.
Everyone's back?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we're back whenever you're ready to go.
Excellent. Let's do this. So lastly, we have appeal number 2706, practical difficulty variance. This is for 8 Pinewood Circle. And excuse me. This variance appeal by Mr. Trevor Watson on behalf of Todd O'Brien and Brittany Bollinger, 8 Pinewood Circle, Assessors Map U017, Lot 63. Mr. Longstaff, would you give us a brief overview of this, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is a practical difficulty variance for a lot at 8 Pinewood Circle in the R2 zone. It's a very, very small 0.06 acre lot, about 1/8 the size of the required lot in the zone. The lot has no legal building window on it. The dwelling was built in the 1930s. So it was there prior to any zoning. And of course, it's now it's time to do some modernization on the building, and the appellant is left making a choice of whether to renovate a non-conforming structure or replace it with another non-conforming structure. That's the board's choice, I guess, to determine whether or not that's the correct path to go. And I'm sure the applicant will explain further.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Do we have someone here representing the applicants?
Yes, Trevor Watson.
Hello, Trevor. Why don't you tell us about your appeal and why you're here?
Right. So Todd and Brittany have owned 8 Pinewood for about a decade now, and 8 Pinewood predates Scarborough's adoption of modern zoning. As Brian noted, it was constructed in the 1930s. As such, is a non-conforming structure which doesn't meet minimum lot size, property line setbacks. It exceeds maximum lot coverage. It's got structural deficiencies, issues with building planning, energy efficiency, and it doesn't meet many life safety minimums, which I know aren't necessarily pertinent to the zoning, but it's all kind of a soup that this all falls into. The structure is built on a parcel, which, as Brian noted, is about 1/8. It's about 2,400 square feet is the lot size, and the existing building footprint is about 960 square feet, with about 1,750 square feet of impervious coverage, which also outside of the shoreland, I don't know of any regulation on the impervious coverage, but we've spent some time investigating possible alternatives, including less stringent variance applications. We've looked into renovating the existing, and we've looked into dormer additions. And at the end of the day, we felt that the only practical option for us was to apply for a practical difficulty variance to build a new house, which ultimately would result in less nonconformity, less impact to the abutters, increased life and safety for the O'Briens, increased energy efficiency, as well as being modern building practice, i.e. structurally sound. So we propose to slightly alter the existing nonconformity by burdening the west property line, which you'll see there's a 12-foot held and a 10-foot held. This is a sort of non-utilized street and common. So, I mean, there's the possibility that somebody could do some deep dive at and figure out exactly what it is. But I think for our purposes, it's basically kind of an orphan, non-buildable parcel of land. And so in so doing, we're gonna alleviate some of the burden to the abutters that have developed areas to the east and to the south. So basically, without the variance, we feel the homeowners aren't free to fully modernize the building to today's safe and efficient building practices. And the reality is, we think that this structure was never really meant to be more than, a 1930s seasonal cottage, which is sort of supported by the evidence of the existing staircase, which is basically like it's like they filled in a pull down attic stair. The discrepancies between the adequate foundations, the existing structure, which is no more than 2x6 joists, which are exceeding their maximum span. And the bottom line is that we feel that without a new build, the serious deficiencies, which are headroom heights, life safety, minimum lighting standards, things of that nature, won't be solved for the same plus or minus the same amount of investment that the O'Briens would be making. So that's sort of where we're at there.
All right, thank you very much. I think at this point, what we're going to do is step through the application. Point
Sorry,
number
Mr.
one.
Chair, can I ask a
Yes.
question generally?
Of course, please. Yes, any questions from the board, please do.
It's
Go
actually
ahead, Ms. Shu.
generally, was this house on the market recently? I kind of stalk realtor.com and I could have sworn I saw this on Realtor not a month or two ago.
I'm not, Todd and Brittany are with us currently. I'm not aware of that, but I don't stock realtor.com, so I can't speak to
I'm
that.
curious what the status of the property is currently, if they use it for full-time residents. I mean, I can see that it was on realtor.com this year, so I'm just kind of curious what the plan is with the property.
We the house has not been listed or considered for listed since we've owned it. So
we've been there since 2011. We use it as a summer residence with our 2 children, with plans to retire there eventually.
So that's a good question, though. If I could just quickly speak to that.
Yes, go ahead.
So the O'Briens are interested in year-round occupancy, or at least having the option of living there year-round, as the majority of the neighborhood has sort of developed over time. And I'll be brief because I answer this later on, but there are some significant deficiencies in how pipes were run because it was never meant to be a seasonal home. So the O'Briens have updated the hot water heater, and because of inaccessible pipes, they're still getting frozen and burst pipes. So they want to use it year round, but there are some issues associated with it.
Okay. Are there other questions from the board at this time? Comments? Okay. Seeing no further comments or questions from the board, we will go into the variance appeal requirements, excuse me. Number one, the need for a variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions in the neighborhood.
Absolutely. So Pinewood Circle, as we all know, it's kind of an eclectic neighborhood that's been developed over time. And basically what started as kind of a 1920s, 1930s sort of seasonal community has developed and grown into a year-round community. And 8 Pinewood is unique in that at 2,400 square feet, it is one of, if not the smallest parcel in the neighborhood, one of the smallest parcels in Scarborough. So again, with no legal building envelope, I think that this is pretty clearly a practical difficulty instance, and without the variance, 8 Pinewood is going to continue to become more and more of an outlier to the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Number 2, the granting of a variance will not produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood. It will not have an unreasonably detrimental effect on either the use or fair market value of present properties.
Right. So 8 Pinewood is a single family residence, and it will continue to be a single family residence. So it's not going to outpace the neighborhood in that regard. Additionally, by alleviating some of the burden on the abutters parcels, current and doesn't maintenance. I think that most of the neighbors, as we'll hear in some of the letters of support, would be very much in favor of the positive effect that the granting of this variance would have on the fair market value and use of the abutting properties.
Okay, thank you. Number 3, the practical difficulty is not the result of action taken by the applicant or prior owner.
This practical difficulty is not a result. The O'Briens purchased the property more than a decade ago, and they've done their best to be good stewards of the property, but it's becoming apparent that at this point, with the 80 plus years of previous and past ownership, the property is unable to be effectively maintained at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Number 4, no other feasible alternative is available to the applicant except a variance.
Right. So we believe this. I mean, not only is there no legal building envelope, which makes practically this very, very difficult, but we've studied some some options.
Trevor, can you hear me?
Is his internet connection breaking up, or is that just me?
No, it is. Trevor, do you want to try taking your video off so you get a little bit better bandwidth on the audio? Turn your camera off.
Yes.
You're breaking up badly.
Yes, bear with me.
Yep, no worries. I can certainly empathize.
Should I back up? I'll answer this question. My answers to
Yeah,
the previous question? Nice.
We can just start over on number 4. No other feasible alternative is available to the applicant except a variance.
Okay. So yes, the non-legal building envelope, no legal building envelope existing is a bit of a challenge. We've studied some alternatives to try and sort of generate more volume, be it with skylight, or at least the impression of volume, be it with skylights and or dormers. However, neither really solves a lot of the problems that are of a concern for the O'Briens, such as life safety. And really any addition, any sort of dormer addition would necessitate some serious structural changes, which would further encroach on the already very low ceiling heights and things of that nature. And that's sort of done in the study on page 5 of the drawing packet. We looked into a limited reduction, which really didn't, even with the benefit of a limited reduction, the area created with that reduction is still quite long and narrow, and it doesn't really create the effect of adding a lot of usable square footage. The addition of a skylight, because of some of the roof lines and just intrinsically how the existing structure is built, the skylights wouldn't really alleviate any of the life safety concerns that the O'Briens have. And then in addition of the dormer, which wouldn't require a variance to adhere to the dormer rules, would require some significant structure to be introduced into the spaces. And because we're not allowed to increase the volume of the non-conforming structure, any additional structure, which again would be very significant, to the tune of plus or minus 10 inches in depth to the 2x6 existing 2x6 structure, would impact the existing ceiling heights and volume. So basically any addition would reduce the habitable or conditionable space, which is kind of a hardship. So we also studied, like, could we design a house where where we play with the roof lines in such a manner where we're kind of like hitting that control point, which is the image in the lower left corner of the page. So if we could build a roof and sort of get to that limited, that reduced setback point, and then be able to continue that roof up, but it just the allowable space that's created with a limited reduction, not one that is enough or consistent throughout the whole space to really allow this house to have any character, which is in keeping with the neighborhood. Let me look at my notes here real quick.
Yep.
And then I just wanted to follow up that the O'Briens have done what they can to maintain and renovate within the existing shell, but there's nothing they can do to solve the very low ceiling heights on the first floor, which we're talking about, 7 to sub 7 foot ceiling heights on the first floor, and even less, like 6.5 foot ceiling heights on the second floor. They've done other things like trying to, as I said earlier, installing a new boiler to try and generate, enough heat, but the house has been added to so many times over the years that plumbing, there's no really rhyme or reason as to how the lines were run, and so they're running into frozen lines. Basically, any renovation we believe any renovation is going to result in reduced habitable square footage.
All right, thank you very much. go to number 5. The granting of a variance will result in bringing the applicant's property more nearly into conformance with surrounding properties.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said earlier, the neighborhood, the neighborhood was sort of built as a seasonal community, and through the years, people have been able to update those houses to year-round residences. And we're seeing a current kind of impressive drive for rehabilitation of some of these structures in the Pinewood Circle neighborhood. And so really the granting of this variance, we believe, will allow for a new structure to be built that will be bringing 8 Pinewood more nearly into conformance with the surrounding year-round properties.
Okay. Number 6, the granting of this variance will not have an unreasonably adverse effect on the natural environment.
Right. So the granting of the variance for 8 Pinewood will not have an unreasonably adverse effect on the natural environment, as we're reducing the overall impervious coverage, as well as introducing more physical space, literal physical space between abutting structures and our own. So this will, allow for more drainage to happen. It'll also allow us to eliminate or properly deal with any hazardous legacy materials that exist on site. As I said in part of the application, there used to be an open cistern in the back corner of the garage that the O'Briens filled in from way back when. So it'll really allow us to improve the natural environment associated with 8 Pinewood.
Okay. Number 7, the property is not located in whole or in part within a shoreland area or flood hazard zone.
Right. So I've checked the Scarborough maps, and I don't believe that that 8 Pinewood Circle is located in whole or in part within the shoreland area or the current or future flood hazard zones.
Okay, thank you. And number 8, strict application of the dimensional standards of the zoning ordinance would both preclude a use of the property that is permitted in the residential 2 district and result in significant economic injury to the applicant.
Right. So the fact that there's no legal building envelope makes the introduction of any volume very, very challenging. This house is the current house is kind of quirky in how it's laid out, which is basically a result of the additions to it over the years. The economic injury is it's a tough one to prove. However, I think we have a good case here because we're so limited on the volume and the structure is so undersized that any type of addition we do to it is going to be impacting the existing square footage, the existing usable space. It's going to be reducing ceiling heights. It's going to be reducing footprint on the interior, because we have to oversize things to meet energy efficiency. We have to oversize things to make up for structural deficiencies. So considering that this house was built as a seasonal camp and added to it over the years, it's going to take a significant investment to modernize and or renovate this house, which, as we included we're a design build firm, so we included a cost comparison in the application. But the bottom line is that any renovation is you can either reduce your ongoing maintenance costs, which if you reduce the annual cost of operating this house, it's going to reduce the habitable square footage. And if you try and do your best to maintain the habitable square footage, you're going to increase your operational costs for this component of this structure. And basically it's reached a point after 80 plus years that it's kind of unable to be effectively maintained. So we're kind of on the edge of a cliff here.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Comments at this time from the board members? Okay, seeing none at this time. Thank you very much. Excuse me. We will now go into the public hearing portion. We'll open the public hearing. Mr. Longstaff, Ms. Christ, has there been any emails or letters regarding this application?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we've received 3 letters and or emails regarding this project. The first one was from Ogden White. He is at 10 Pinewood Circle. And he says he's in support of the plan and the granting of the variance requested by the O'Briens for the replacement of their existing house on Pinewood Circle. The plan shows a replacement house which would be consistent in scale and finish with others in the immediate neighborhood and is an improvement over existing. This is a thoughtful plan and is reasonable and practical solution for a property in need both structural and functional renovation. The O'Briens are neighbors whom we have known in good standing for more than a decade, and I hope you will rule in favor of their proposal. We also received a email from Stephanie Pontrelli. She is the owner of 2 and 4 Pinewood Circle. She says, I've reviewed the plans for renovation of 8 Pinewood Circle, including the improvement of rear setbacks, and agree with the proposal. The renovated home as drawn will fit right in with the other beloved and quirky homes on that street. Beloved and quirky is, I think, the operable phrase. We also received an email from Bruce Flaherty. I'm not finding where Bruce is from, but he says he has reviewed and agrees with the proposed plans to remove and replace the dwelling at 8 Pinewood Circle. I don't see his address, so I'm not sure which property he owns. Those are the three letters that we've received. I didn't receive any phone calls or other correspondence.
Can I just interject? Bruce owns the property immediately to the east of the O'Brien of 8 Pinewood. He owns 6 Pinewood.
6 Pinewood. Okay. Thank you very much for clarifying. Are there any members of the public here tonight in this meeting who would like to join the call and express any comments on this appeal? Go ahead and raise your hand in the chat and we'll bring you in. Do we see anyone there? Doreen or Brian?
Ogden was present, but I don't see his hand raised.
Okay.
Yeah, I see no one raising their hand.
Okay, then we will close the public hearing at this time. And now the board will deliberate within itself to discuss the findings for each one of these criteria for the application. Okay. Number 1, the need for the variance is due to the unique circumstances of the property and not to the general conditions in the neighborhood. Mr. Bork.
Yes, most definitely. This is a tiny lot, much smaller than other lots in the area, and really one of the smallest in Scarborough, as the applicant pointed out. So it is quite unique.
Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen?
Agreed. With such a small lot and property, the setbacks would make impossible building envelope to design within.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. Mr. Freilinger?
Agreed. Nothing further to add.
Mr. Howe?
Agreed.
Ms. Shute?
I agree with the board.
Excellent. As Mr. Bork pointed out, this 50 by 50 non-conforming lot is one of the smallest in town. Any kind of replacement dwelling that they would want to put on this property would also be non-conforming. That being said, all those voting for point one of this application, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. Number 2, the granting of a variance will not produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood and will not have an unreasonably detrimental effect on either the fair use or fair market value of abutting properties. Mr. Bork?
I think we have some pretty good testimony from the abutters that the design of the new building would be in character with the other abutting homes. So that's a very important factor here. Not only that, but by replacing the building, it will upgrade values of other properties, as well as this property itself in that particular neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen?
Agreed, as Mr. Bork stated, the adjacent abutters and their testimony help speak to this non-concern.
Mr. Freilinger?
Agreed. It seems like some of the renovations that were done over the life of the property actually took this house out of the cottage-like character of the Pine Point neighborhood, actually. So the proposed design and with the endorsement of the neighboring abutters clearly puts this in the character of Pine Point. So no objections.
Thank you. Mr. Howe?
I agree to the statements that have been made.
Ms. Shoup?
I agree with the board.
Excellent. There's one, I'll just confirm, the board received 3 letters of support for the project. No one's opposed to it. When we're talking about detrimental effect on the use of fair market value of abutting properties, I can only imagine that a brand new house would only improve the fair market value of abutting properties. And according to the drawings that they provided, it looks like it improves the rear yard encroachment by a few feet, which is no more detrimental than the market value of any other properties in the neighborhood. So that being said, all those in favor of number 2, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I agree as well. Number 3, the practical difficulty is not the result of action taken by the applicant or a prior owner. Mr. Bork?
Well, this property, the building predates modern zoning. And really, there is no reasonable building envelope. So what they're proposing here is really to replace the existing property with a new one with a similar footprint. So it doesn't really, change that much in terms of the dimensions. There's a lot coverage. So, I think that's very reasonable.
Mr. Karen?
Agreed, based on the date it was originally built. The difficulty was not a direct action of the current or previous owner.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. Mr. Freilinger?
No, agreed with both comments.
Mr. Howe?
Agree with the board.
Ms. Shoup?
I agree.
And the dwelling was constructed in 1930, so there weren't really any zoning ordinances back then. All those in favor of number 3, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. Excuse me, number 4, no other feasible alternative is available to the applicant except a variance. Mr. Bork?
Well, I think the applicant has done a very, very good job showing that this is the only reasonable solution. The existing structure isn't really practical for renovation. It's going to be costly, and you're still left with something that's not practical for use and would be high in maintenance ongoing. And the cost of a new building would be actually lower, according to the estimates. Not much, but it's in the ballpark. And the ongoing cost of maintaining the property will be much lower because it will be built to standards. And on top of that, it will meet current requirements for building codes. So, a lot of positives here for replacing as opposed to the only other choice, which would be to rebuild the existing structure.
Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen?
Agreed. Just simply based on the site constraints, there, as was discussed, regardless of what option or design of the house itself, a variance would be required. And I believe that the applicants have done a great job to reduce the existing setbacks of the existing dwelling.
Thank you, Mr. Freilinger.
Agreed. And I'd also point out that the appellants pointed out that there's really no way to make the home almost safe for residents under existing safety codes. And I think that's a material fact to bring into the idea that, anything they do to touch that house would require a variance of some sort. So I think they've demonstrated number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Freilinger. Mr. Howe?
I agree with the board.
Ms. Shoup?
Practical difficulty variance appeals are the hardest appeals that we have. I feel like every time that someone comes, they have a lot of evidence that they need to present before us so that they can, overcome these. I unfortunately do not feel like they've presented enough evidence tonight to show me why they would not be able to work with the property that they have. I appreciate the spreadsheet showing how much it would cost to completely renovate the property as opposed to the new construction. I don't really see much of a difference in those. Unfortunately, the testimony and everything that I've heard tonight is they don't really like how the house is set up and that the ceilings are too low. I'm not really seeing a lot of evidence. I'm not seeing stuff. I'm not seeing pictures like we have in other applications in the past supporting the current condition of the property and why it needs these changes. I understand they want to update it. I personally don't. I would like to see more as to why. I don't see anything tonight that tells me that this property is dilapidated. I've heard testimony to it, but I haven't seen any pictures of sort of the issues that they've been presented with tonight. I personally feel like they need more information to tell me that there isn't another feasible alternative. I think that they could work with what they have. So no, I don't think they've met this.
Thank you, Ms. Shoup. I'll add one of the concerns that I have with this property are the code issues and life safety issues with this building as it is currently in place and as they've described it in this application. One note they added about skylights and dormers trying to accommodate a feasible means of egress, which really isn't recognized for an emergency point of egress. They've indicated that they've renovated what they're able to. Whether or not these continued renovations would continue to bring the building up to code and would be able to address all of these issues. I agree with Ms. Shoup, it would have been nice to see more photographs of, some of the masonry, some of the foundation. Is there any wiring in there that needs to be replaced? Photographs of the frozen pipes or a lack of insulation around these pipes showing that there's issues here. Ultimately, it is a very, very, very old house. And the lot that they're building on really doesn't grant them much flexibility for any kind of movement here. So any kind of work that they would want to do to expand or redo this really kind of puts them in a poor position. That being said, they are proposing a new structure that would be code compliant. And from my standpoint, I look at it from the standpoint of life safety. So I don't see any issues here. All those in favor of number 4 being met, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shoup?
No.
And I will vote yes. Number 5, the granting of a variance will result in bringing the applicant's property more nearly into conformance with surrounding properties. Mr. Bork?
Yes, I think it certainly does that. Most of the properties in this neighborhood have been updated for year-round use. This particular property was designed, as all the other properties were back in the 30s or perhaps earlier, as summer cottages only, or camps, if you will. So, this really takes the property up to the standards that are necessary for year-round use, which brings it into conformity with the other properties nearby.
Mr. Karen?
I agree with Mr. Bork, and as previously discussed, the proposed changes with this application are increases or improvements to usage and life safety factors.
Mr. Freilinger?
I agree with the comments that have been made. I'd also add too that the Pine Point neighborhood or village has developed a particular kind of architectural and design style, and the type of ad hoc or idiosyncratic design choices that have been made in the lifetime of this property would probably not pass muster with today's village planning standards. So I think, yes, it clearly brings it into conformance with the evolving year-round nature of Pine Point and with the design standards that would be expected for this area going forward.
All right, thank you. And just for one point of clarification on that, Mr. Freilinger, we're in the Prouts Neck area. So it is adjacent to the Pine Point.
Sorry, I live in Pine Point. I sometimes make that mistake. Apologies.
No, it's okay. Just clearing it up for the record. Mr. Howe?
Well, yes and no. Terribly cute place. I love the stone exterior to the house, and I think it fits in really nice with what's there. I mean, I understand, low ceilings and wanting to have something a little bit different than what was, put together, 90 years ago. I don't know. I don't know if I can agree with that one.
Okay, is that a no?
That's a no.
Okay, Ms. Shoup?
Yeah, I think any improvement that they were going to be making would bring it in conformance with the surrounding properties who are also making improvements.
Okay, and looking at, for me, looking at the surrounding properties and seeing the support that surrounding properties have for this renovation, it would appear that the characteristic that they're looking to go for here with this house would match what others in the neighborhood are also similarly experiencing. Seeing that, all those in favor of number 5, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
No.
Ms. Shoup?
Yes.
Okay. Number 6, the granting of this variance will not have an unreasonably adverse effect on the natural environment, Mr. Bork.
Well, since it's maintaining approximately the same lot coverage, really the only thing is changing is it's moving slightly, toward that unused right away, and on the other side, it actually puts a little bit more space between it and the abutting property. I think actually it makes it better as far as the location of the footprint. So yeah, I think this is definitely an improvement.
Okay, Mr. Karen?
Based on the information provided and the size of the existing and the size of the proposed, I agree with Mr. Bork about the difference or delta in the two. Reduction based on the sketch shown currently for parking seems to be a reduction. There are a few trees out in front based on the existing versus new sketch that may be affected, but certainly other space on the property which new vegetation could be planted.
Thank you. Mr. Freilinger?
I'd observe by updating the house to modern standards, drainage will be improved. They'll have to go through a site and soil inspection for a house that has been built has been updated over a long period of time. And there may be some remediation issues that would have to be addressed over the course of the construction. And to the earlier points, the footprint's being reduced modestly. So I think they've met the standard for this question.
Mr. Howe?
I agree with the board.
Ms. Shute?
I agree with the comments made by the board.
Okay. And looking at this one, the dwelling, the amount of impervious area looks like it's going to be smaller. So again, allowing more natural stormwater management to go through this area is a key point to this number 6 in the application. We're talking to adverse effect on natural environment. Also, additionally, a house is built in that time frame long ago. Typically, you're using lead paint. You're using unhealthy insulation materials and other building materials that aren't used today, just kind of due to the health factors. So I would agree that this has been met for number 6. We'll take a vote. Mr. Bork?
Mr. Chair,
yes,
before you
forgive me.
I just wanted to clarify one point. I think somebody mentioned that the footprint would be reduced. The actual house footprint being proposed is larger than the existing, but the impervious area will be reduced because of the reworking of the yard and the slate patios and the garage driveway and all that good stuff. But the footprint of the house is actually expanding by a little bit.
Right. I think that was my comment. And I appreciate the correction on that one.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood. Not that it would make a huge difference, but it could. So I want to make sure that we got the facts right.
And I was thinking about actually the impervious area, the reduction of the size of the driveway and the slate removal and that sort of thing. So thank you.
Yeah. One more point, Mr. Chair, before you move on. I hate to interrupt, but you did not
That's
vote
okay.
on the last item.
Number 5.
You
Excuse
didn't
me.
vote.
I
Yeah, you didn't
apologize.
vote. Could I record that, please?
Absolutely. Please forgive me about that. So all those in favor of the number 5 answer being met, Mr. Bork?
No, we got those. I didn't get your vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
did not
apologize.
get
thought you
your
said
vote. You
that.
did not vote.
I did. I do support number 5. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize for the correction on that. It may not have been picked up by my mic. So now that we've discussed number 6, who do we leave off with? I believe we were finished. So now we're going to vote on number 6. All those in favor, we'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Fralinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Okay.
Ms. Shute?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Number 7, the property is not located in whole or in part within a shoreland area or flood hazard zone. Mr. Longstaff, would you confirm this one for us?
I can confirm that it is neither in the shoreline zone or a special flood hazard area, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Longstaff. Up and down, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Fralinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Ms. Shute?
Yes.
And I agree as well. Lastly, number 8, strict application of the dimensional standards of the zoning ordinance would both preclude a use of the property that is permitted in the residential 2 district and result in significant economic injury to the applicant. We'll start with you, Mr. Bork.
Well, this is a 2-part. The strict dimensional standards really would preclude any building. This is not a buildable lot within the R2 district. So what they're really doing is proposing to build a new structure that is no less compliant nor more compliant. It's really approximately the same lot coverage, slightly more, true, by a few square feet perhaps. But I just don't see that as being an issue, because of this change in zoning. The second part of this is really the practical, difficulty part. Now, I think they've laid out a very good case for in totality, building a new building would deal with all the code issues, safety issues, maintenance issues, the ongoing costs of operation, These are all costs that have to be considered long-term. So it's not just a straight comparison in terms of the construction cost, but it's really the ongoing expenses. A new building, will result in satisfying all of those criteria. And I think that, not granting this variance would result in a hardship on the owners of this property. Is it a total loss? Of course not, but we're not considering that. We're only considering a practical difficulty here. So I do support this.
Thank you, Mr. Bork. Mr. Karen?
Thank you. Yes, two parts. First part, strict application of the standards would preclude the property to be reasonably used within its current district. We already talked about the site constraints and how small it is, so no concerns there. The second part of it, the significant economic injury. Once again, many factors to be in consideration, but once again, it's intended to be used in a similar manner than it is now. The client has provided some documentation about the cost comparison of updating the existing structure versus building new. And based on what's provided, it would appear that new construction is less expensive.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. Mr. Fralinger?
Again, and I appreciate the logic that Mr. Bork and Mr. Karen have taken us through. On the first one, I think it's obviously true on its surface that the strict application of the dimensional standards would make this an unbuildable lot. There's no other use based on that strict application standard. For the economic injury, the way that I kind of see this is even the comparison of tear down and build a new structure versus the renovation still leaves two very different properties. The renovated property still would not be up to, frankly, life safety standards based on what we've been told without a subsequent approval for a variance or just a different variance than what the applicants have asked for today. Whereas, and it would continue to have higher maintenance costs and probably lead to a home that doesn't have, that will deteriorate over time because who's going to put much more money into the money pit? So I do feel like the significant economic injury standard is met on this one. When you're comparing just the upfront cost variable, I don't think that's a full economic analysis. And I think that a full economic understanding of injury to the applicant has to incorporate future loss of opportunity cost and future maintenance costs and the future cost of living in what is a building that is not safe by our current definition of what safe is. So I think I think this one's been met.
Thank you, Mr. Fralinger. Mr. Howe?
Well, I agree and disagree with some of what's been said. Can I leave it at that?
No, you do have to.
You need a yes or a no, James?
We do, yes.
Kind of go back to what Karen was talking about. I don't see a lot of evidence about, I mean, I do heating, so I understand frozen pipes and that type of thing. And if I could see a foundation, if I could see underlying issues, what was installed for a system, if it's a brand new boiler, whoever put it in, that's their fault that they didn't size it and do a heat loss accordingly based on insulation, windows. And if I were the folks, I would be going back to them and asking them to take care of the problem of frozen pipes. That would be asked of me if I had installed it. That's the requirement of my profession. So, just talking about that piece of it. I understand the low ceilings. I think it's a charming little cottage, which is what it was designed to be. I understand they don't want it and want something different. I don't. No.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Shoup?
Okay, so I first just want to touch on briefly on a couple of the comments that Mr. Freilinger said. I apologize if I said that wrong. I just want to remind the board and the applicants and everyone, we're only considering the evidence that was presented to us this evening. So I know maybe I don't seem super friendly, but I actually only am basing the information on the information that was presented to me this evening. Yes, obviously, if we do not grant this, they will be computed, they will be precluded from using the property if they were going to tear it down and not be able to rebuild on it. But they have a property with a home on it. And they've presented a spreadsheet showing us there's no cost difference between renovating it and a new construction. Unfortunately, the only evidence that they presented to us this evening showed us that to renovate it would only be a little bit more than new construction. Been on the board 7 years. We've been doing practical difficulty variance appeals for a long time. I think we've gone back and forth. I personally think that we need more. I want to see more evidence. I want to see why this is needed. I'm looking at a house and I don't see anything wrong with the home. And again, this is a very difficult thing to overcome. And this is something that some properties that are always with. So maybe someone 10 years ago looked at this house and said, I don't want to touch it because I can't tear it down. I do think I just cannot support it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shoup. From my standpoint here, I'm looking at this from the standpoint of any kind of legal building window. Looking at the strict interpretation of the ordinance, they wouldn't allow to be building a home here at all. And this should just be a vacant lot, and not even a lot at all, either absorbed with one of the adjacent properties. You can't legally build here if that were to be built here today. But it is a permitted use in this district to be able to have a single family dwelling. And this is a house on a lot that was there prior to when ordinances were put into place. Looking at the second portion of this, number 8, and the assessed value of the property, I have to trust with the information provided in front of me that the cost estimation provided by the representatives of the appellant, they're having a side-by-side comparison of the renovation versus new construction. They're stating that the renovation is more expensive. But for me, the largest issue that I have is that they're stating that they're unable to address the life safety concerns that are inherent with this building because of how old that it was built. There's a staircase that is essentially a fire escape or a pull down staircase from the ceiling rather than a true staircase or even a wraparound staircase that goes upstairs in one instance. From the standpoint of life safety and FPA, proper points of egress, I have to go with what I think would be the most safe structure that would be on this piece of property. And so I think that this would be met with a new constructed home in this location. So I would vote yes. Seeing no more, that kind of wraps us up on these questions here. Do I have a motion on the floor?
Mr. Chair, before we enter a motion, I think we really need to vote on this one.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Please excuse me. I'm a little bit late. It's been a long day for me. So we will vote on the merits of number 8. Please, we'll start with you, Mr. Bork. Thank you very much for reminding me. How do you vote, sir?
I vote yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
No.
Ms. Shoup?
No.
And I will vote aye. Now, do we have a motion for appeal number 2706?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I make a motion to approve appeal number 2706, practical difficulty variance.
Do I have a second?
Move to second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Mr. Karen?
Aye.
Mr. Freilinger?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
No.
Ms. Shoup?
No.
And I will vote aye on this one. So appeal number 2706 passes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you all.
I believe that is the end of our agenda this evening. Are there any comments from the town, Ms. Christ or Mr. Longstaff that you'd like to make?
I don't have anything other than to say that I do believe at our May hearing, we will have a full board again. Our old friend Leroy Crockett, I believe, will be confirmed as an alternate member.
That's great. It'd be great to have Leroy back.
Also, I would mention, just a reminder for anyone that's still listening, the town office will be closed on Monday in recognition of Patriots Day.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Longstaff. I don't have anything to mention other than the MMA has posted more dates of the board training that's offered by the Maine Municipal Association. So I encourage any board members, I'll say new and current rather than new and old, to reach out to Doreen or Brian and they can set you up with attending one of those sessions. So that being said, is there a motion on the floor to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Motion second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Aye.
I will take that as unanimous. Thank you all very much. And that concludes our meeting tonight.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.